Chapter 81, on Denial. It wasn't denial. Denial implied that she wasn't acknowledging something, that she wasn't taking it for face value, that she couldn't compute and therefore chose to ignore it. Ivil knew that Aurora was too smart by half to be in denial. So it was something else, but she couldn't pinpoint what it was. The right move seemed to be leaving things as they were. Aurora would figure it out in due time, and Ivil wasn't going anywhere. They had an eternity to figure it out, and she planned on enjoying as much of that eternity as she could. The dancing came to an end with good-humored complaints about swollen feet and a few compliments shared with shy smiles. The thing between them hung there. A guillotine blade in a zero-G environment. The string was cut, but there was no momentum to its mass, so everything stayed where it was. Ivil played arm candy to Aurora as she went about her work. She greeted dignitaries, spoke to lesser politicians, shook hands, kissed cheeks, smiled, laughed, and spun her web across the room. Ivil had always found Aurora attractive. She was. Now, she found her resplendent as the phobia noble lady smiled brightly and made quick friends. She had an impressive memory for names, a quick wit, a way to draw connections between people in a hurry, and plenty of worthwhile gossip that had the Jovians fluttering around her like moths around a flame. Ivil knew it was fake. The smile, the laughter, the quips, and yet, an oil painting wasn't real. It was pigment on canvas, it was color and shade and contrast, drawn and dabbled across cloth to make something in an artist's mind become more real than their mere imaginings, but it was a representation of reality. It was no less beautiful for being a representation, but Ivil wasn't going to be fooled so easily. Her lips wouldn't touch the canvas when she wanted what the painting was showing. Here and now, Aurora was the image of a clever, well-connected, well-educated politician growing into their power and accumulating more. She was a masterwork canvas of a rising star, and Ivil hung off of her arm as a silent protector. The party came to a gracious end. The music was set lower, the older guests begged off to head back to bed at a timely hour, and only the young and drunk remained, so Aurora and Ivil made their polite escape after thanking the host who seemed utterly exhausted from an evening of spinning so many plates. They were quiet as they walked back to the Savoy, but Aurora hung on to Ivil's arm the entire way nonetheless, until they slipped into the airlock and reached the corridor where their rooms were waiting. Aurora stopped, and Ivil did the same. "Thank you," she said. She finally deigned to meet Ivil's eyes. But, Ivil repeated. Aurora seemed to drop what she was going to say. Instead, what she asked felt unrehearsed. "Would you really give me the world?" Ivil nodded. "I would, but I don't think I'd need to. You're clever, smart, knowledgeable, and most of all, you're ambitious. If I only gave you the right tools, Aurora, I think you would take the world for yourself." "Oh," Aurora said. She tore her gaze away. "That was one of the nicest compliments I've received, I think." "It wasn't a compliment. Saying that you're beautiful isn't a compliment, it's a statement of fact, and saying that you're ambitious is likewise just speaking the plain truth." "You're a flatterer," Aurora said. "That's a statement of fact too, isn't it?" Ivil smiled. "I suppose I am, for the right person. I think this could work. If you want my help settling things with your family, just let me know. I'll do what I can." Aurora nodded. "I'll consider it," she said. "I had a lovely evening." "Thank you." Ivil nodded, then watched as Aurora moved down the corridor. The woman looked back once before slipping into her room. Being alone again, so suddenly, left a bit of an ache in her stomach. Though she wasn't entirely alone, was she? Ivil turned around and looked at the lockers next to the entryway. "You can come out now." "There's no one here?" "Likely story," Ivil said. The door opened, and 26 practically spilled out of it. "Okay, fine," she said. "But I didn't mean it." "Mean what?" Ivil asked. "To spy." 26 brushed a hand down her overalls. "You didn't think I was spying on you? I think you were standing here when the airlock started to cycle and for some reason dove into a locker instead of standing here, where you're allowed and expected to be," Ivil said. Oh. Yeah, sorry. I wasn't really thinking. Ivil nodded, then reached over and placed a hand atop 26's head, where it felt like it belonged. It's okay. What were you doing before I caught you not spying on us? Honestly? 26 asked. She stretched out a little, reminding Ivil of an affectionate cat pressing into a rub. I'm kind of bored. Usually there's a million things to fix, but this ship isn't tip-top. I'm waiting for a few parts to arrive for the hell together. I had to order them special. I might need help installing a new cowling. It's way too big to move solo. I might be able to help with that, Ivil said. Moving a bit of metal around was a non-issue. Meh? We can hire some help. There are plenty of services here for that kind of thing. It's a small job. Once we have the current engine cowl off, I want to take a peek inside. No one's been in there since the Hell Together was retrofitted, and that was ages ago. Anyway, what are you up to? Nothing much, Ivil said. Aurora and I had a nice evening, I think. Oh, 26 said. She looked towards the room Aurora had entered. I wanted to talk to her about the budget, but this isn't a good time for it, is it? You're quite good at reading people, aren't you? Ivil asked. Being observant kept me alive this far, 26 said with a dimple-cheeked grin. And a good mechanic knows when to let things settle. I'll see if I can help later, but I think maybe she wants a bit of space? What about you, do you want some space? 26 shrugged. No? I guess not. Why? I was considering asking you out. Wow. Not even 5 minutes after bringing Aurora back. Ivil smiled a small, private smile. It behooves one to be observant, you said. I observed that you're a little envious, I think. 26 flushed, then shrugged a little. Maybe. You two looked super pretty today. I'm certain we can find you a nice dress. Do you know how to dance? I can teach you. I don't think anyone wants to see me dancing, 26 said. I do, Ivil replied earnestly. She didn't say that she had seen 26 dancing before. Though to call it dancing was a stretch. When 26 was alone in the engineering bay, she'd sometimes do a little side-to-side sway, moving her heels while shaking her rear and shoulders. It wasn't quite a dance, but it was very cute. 26's mouth worked for a bit before she huffed. Nope. I wouldn't mind going out, but not for dancing. I see. How about the arcade? I've been told that there's a nice one somewhere on Driftwood. It's mostly a scam, but that doesn't mean we can't have a good time. And I can show you how to cheat at some games with your core. 26 grinned. Oh. You think I need to cheat to beat you? Yes. Ha. I'll show you. You're on. But you're not going dressed like that, are you? She gestured to the suit Ivil was still wearing. Why not? Well, you look very nice in that, but it's a bit formal. 26 was in overalls, though she had the front opened up all the way to the crotch, exposing the thin muscle shirt she wore beneath. Her equivalent of casual wear. Ivil shrugged. I don't see why not. Shouldn't I look good on a date? Well, 26 stuttered as her cheeks reddened. I guess. But I don't really have nice things to wear, so it's not fair. There was a dangerous gleam in Ivil's eye for a moment. The kind of thing that would make even a planetary ruler nervous. Oh. Are you saying that I should drag you out to buy some nice clothes? I'm not saying that at all, 26 said. Are you sure? I think it would be fun to play dress up with you. Nope. I heard Missy's horror stories. I'm not falling for it. Fine then. Let me get changed. I'll allow you to win this one, to make up for all the losses later. Ivil would get her chance, later. Interlude 8, The Silly Noble Girl. She paced the main room of the Safo and tried to come to grips with everything. It wasn't working very well, but that didn't stop her from stomping up and down anyway. Aurora Sterlingworth was a ball of conflicting emotions at the moment, and seeing as how she was all alone for a moment, she didn't feel that same straining need to keep it all contained. She wished that she was the violent sort, then maybe she could throw something, kick a wall, maybe fling some tools across the corridor. But no, the thought of 26 disappointingly having to pick up after her mess left a pit of guilt in her too deep for that to ever be possible. Instead, she politely stomped back and forth through the corridors of the ship she had started to call home. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Her little tryst with adventure was. Realistically, she knew that it would end in some amount of disappointment. Even if she was mildly successful, her family would always keep an eye on her moving forwards. She'd mark herself as a risk. But damn it, it was that or be chattel, and she wasn't going to go out without at least having put up the semblance of a fight. Now she was tangled up. Not just in the entire ordeal around Jupiter, a dozen factions with their own interests, fledgling alliances, and plenty of backstabbing. It was what she expected. It was what she'd been bred for and yet never expected to actually do. She loved that part of it. The rest of the tangle. Aurora had maybe allowed herself to imagine running into a dashing young woman while she was out making a name for herself. She was allowed to imagine such things, no? Someone to have a romantic tryst with, to spend a few passionate nights together before she was wrestled away back to Phobos and all the responsibilities that came with her family name. It had been supposed to remain a bit of midnight fantasizing. Now she was in some sort of convoluted multidimensional love shape of some sort and she wasn't sure which way was up anymore. Missy was out of the running, somehow, and yet Pixie was in by dint of being competent, obviously desperate for affection, and by being cute. 26 was somehow the front runner in the whole thing and... okay, Aurora could understand that one. 26 reminded her of the golden retriever one of her uncles had imported from Earth at enormous expense. It was impossible not to like her. And 26's stuttering compliments and subtle affections made Aurora's heart flutter. One of Aurora's necklaces had broken a few days prior, and 26 nailed it, repaired it, and left it by her door in a little box with a note saying she'd fixed it. It was such a simple but kind gesture that Aurora felt something about it. Honestly though, a relationship would never form between them. She found 26 cute, but the young woman was. Aurora groaned and rubbed at her face. She found 26 beneath her, didn't she? She was entirely aware of how stupid that was, and yet years of instinct kicked in anyway. Well, she could admit to herself that it wasn't just that. 26 wasn't the sort to make the first move. Aurora wasn't either. Were circumstances different, they'd probably happily circle around each other, flirting in small and subtle ways, until they were both gray. As the ancient memes went, they were both bottoms. That would have been fine. She'd go on her way, 26 would go hers, and Aurora would live to regret never taking any action for the rest of her life. The usual. The issue was Evelyn. If that even was her name. No, she knew it wasn't her name. Aurora wasn't stupid. She could put two and two together, but as was often the case when it came to that woman, the numbers grew exponentially, so much so that the result of her simple addition was practically nonsensical. She wanted to ask. To pin Evelyn to a bulkhead and demand to know if her suspicions were right. Because if they were, then what the hell was going on? Was this some sort of joke to her? But Evelyn was so brutally, simply honest about her intentions. She was, in her own way, kind and attentive and so stupidly powerful. If anyone was going to be pinned to anything, it was Aurora, and then Evelyn would press those cold lips of hers against her, and Aurora would melt. She wouldn't be able to put up any resistance, and... You, good there. Aurora screamed. She found herself clinging to one of the walls, half climbed onto a shelf with what looked like a spanner in her free hand. She felt like a cat that had just been spooked. Missy stared at her impassively, hip cocked to the side with one hand on them, her other arm loose. "I'll take that as a no," she tried. "You scared me," Aurora said. "I thought I was alone." "Clearly. And what exactly does that mean?" Aurora asked as she straightened her outfit and gently set down the tool. Red in the face, eyes closed, chewing on your lip. "Your hands were definitely one dash, you clearly misread the situation," Aurora snapped. Missy blinked slowly, then smiled. Sure. Aurora narrowed her eyes, but she could hardly call the woman out, not when she'd been caught thinking so hard about something. I wasn't expecting you. I thought the sofa was empty. It was. I went out to get some supplies. Unless you want to do the shopping yourself? Nah. Cool. She crossed her arms and leaned to the side. So, what's got you all hot and bothered? Nothing, Aurora lied. Uh-huh. So, did you sleep with nothing yet? Or? Nah. You're too prim and proper for that. You're the sort that would wait for an invitation in the mail. Aurora took in a deep breath from her nose. That's insulting. You didn't deny it, Missy pointed out. She smirked knowingly. Or maybe it's that you're waiting for nobody to bend you over and give your polite asses a dash. Aurora coughed loud enough to interrupt Missy mid. Whatever that was. Please don't, she said. Fine, fine. I've got to warn you, though, if you're waiting for a 26 to make the first move, you're going to be waiting for a long, long time. Unless you've got a whole engine in those britches of yours, she's not gonna go poking around. Too shy by half, that one. It's not that, Aurora said. Oh. So it's definitely that, but it's also more? Wow. Missy whistled. The little tugboat thing is real, huh? So, you and Evelyn and 26? Color me impressed. It's nothing official. So do you want it to be? Missy asked. Aurora shifted. I don't see why I have to share details of my love life with anyone. That prompted a snort from the former Wormham. Loveleaf implies that there's any amount of love-making going on. You three are firmly in the making dough-eyes stage. And you'd be better? Aurora asked. Yeah, Missy said with absolute confidence. I've been around. I know what I want, and when I want it I get it. She tilted her head to one side. Bet that if either of them pushed you they'd be getting it too, fancy girl. Want some advice? I think all of your advice will be sexual in nature, so no, Aurora said. Missy rolled her eyes. Don't be like that. I've been teasing you because you're uptight about it. Sex is fun and all, but it's not everything. Hell, some of my best relationships didn't hinge on it. Never the best ones, but some of them. Nah, my advice to you, princess, is to get your shit into gear. Because throwing a shit fit in here while you're all alone isn't going to accomplish anything. You think I want to, Aurora said. She wasn't even sure what she meant by that. I think you do, Missy said. I bet there's a lot holding you back. And I'll bet 10 times as much that none of that stuff is actually important. Don't let your own head get in the way of happiness. Loyalty isn't real. Family is whatever. Nations don't care about you. Get happy while you can. And I bought some juice, it'll be in the fridge. Aurora blinked as she tried to parse all of that. By the time she did, Missy had walked past with a backpack slung over her shoulder that jingled and jangled with every step. That woman was a menace. And she clearly didn't know what she was talking about. Aurora chewed on her lip some more. Well, maybe she could do something about it, but there were a few hours of time left to worry and pacing, and she wasn't about to waste those by standing here and not stressing about it. She wasn't just some silly noble girl. Interlude 9, The Silly Mechanic. 26 was as nervous as someone doing their first core coolant decoupling on a live reactor, but she was working hard not to let it show. It was actually not too hard to just keep smiling, mostly because despite the fact that she felt like her insides were a turbine filled with loose washers, she was also happy. The smile wasn't forced. If anything, she had to keep a tight leash on that smile because there was a very real possibility that she'd start giggling and that would be mortifying. Her hand was wrapped around Evelyn's, and she couldn't help but worry that the taller, hotter, cooler woman would notice how badly she was sweating. Have you ever been to an arcade before? 26 asked. I have not, Evelyn replied. She tilted her head very slightly to one side. I've heard of them, and of course I've seen a few in shows and movies, and they've come up in books before. Do you read a lot? 26 asked. She wasn't sure if they'd had this exact conversation before or not, but she was grasping at anything she could to make sure that conversation didn't stall out. That would be the worst, having nothing to say, the air being filled with a long, awkward silence. But no, Evelyn was way too cool for that, and she kept things engaged and would ask 26 some smart questions every so often. I've read my fair share. Do you read anything other than technical manuals? Erotica. But 26 would rather stick her head in a turbine than admit it aloud. And nope. Just non-fiction and technical stuff for me. I know it's a little boring. Nonsense, Evelyn said. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not interesting. Well, I'm really not, 26 said. Evelyn sniffed. I think you're very interesting, and I'm the objective judge of these sorts of things. If I say so, then it is so. 26 laughed. She felt her cheeks reddening a little at the compliment, and it certainly didn't help all of the loose nuts and bolts in her chest from bouncing around, but it had sounded entirely earnest and certain, so much so that she couldn't find it in her to deny it. Thanks, she said. How did you end up so confident anyway? Evelyn frowned a little and thought. 26 wasn't going to tell her, but the taller women's eyebrows were very expressive. They gave away a lot about what she was thinking at any given time. I'm afraid that I don't have a helpful answer for that one. I've been very confident from a young age, as far back as I can remember. Time and experience turned what was probably unearned confidence into something sharper and harder to bend. Huh, I guess. So little Evelyn was a hothead? You could say that, Evelyn said. I was an orphan, taken in by the army. There were hundreds of us back then. Back then? 26 asked. This would be some time before the Second Inter-System War, Evelyn said. There were some pretty high tensions at the time. Lots of growing pains for Mars. Anyway, we were trained from a young age to be the next elite of Mars. I took to it like a fish to water. Is that why you're so strong? 26 asked. I suppose. It was a good start. Eventually the program fell apart, but being wildly overconfident, and feeling betrayed, I decided to take everything I thought was owed to me. I succeeded, somehow. Part luck, part brazen disregard for any issues I might run into, and a large part. My opponents at the time made the conscious decision to underestimate me. It was one of the last times that happened. She looked up and at the ceiling, but 26 had the impression she was looking back into her own past. You're too young to be this nostalgic, 26 said as she pulled Evelyn ahead some more. The arcade was just up ahead, and judging by how loud it was, and the number of flashing colors coming from within, it seemed like a good place to allow oneself to be distracted. She looked back to see Evelyn smiling fondly as she easily kept up with 26's tugging. They entered the arcane arcade and were directed to a booth where tickets were being sold. 26 reached into one of the pockets of her cargo pants, but Evelyn touched her shoulder. I'll pay, she said. No, you won't, 26 said. I'll pay. She smiled at the young guy behind the counter even as she pulled out her wallet. Oh, will you now? Evelyn asked. I will. Didn't you just talk big about confidence? Well, I'm confident that I can pay, so I will. Having confidence is wonderful. It even looks good on you. But being confident that you can beat me at something? Now that's just presumptuous. 26 laughed. Too late, she said as she pulled out her card. She glanced at the prices on the wall and made an effort not to wince. She could afford this. She had mostly been keeping her pay to herself, only buying the occasional tool. Compared to that, a few tokens at the arcade was nothing. The food was super overpriced though. That wasn't even her unwillingness to splurge talking, that was just common sense. So, what do we start with? Evelyn asked. 26 said as she scanned the arcade. It was pretty busy, almost every machine had someone there, but there were a few unoccupied, and there weren't really any real lines behind any of them. What kind of games are you good at? I'd rather think I'll be good at anything requiring good reflexes, Evelyn said. Ah. Are those the prizes? 26 followed the taller woman's gaze to a far wall where toys and plush animals and a few small boxes with electronics sat. I think so. Oh, should we aim for something to get first? That way we know how many tickets to collect? That seems reasonable, Evelyn said. They walked over, and 26 instantly found her attention snapping over to a box in one corner. It had collected a fine sheen of dust over the top edge. No one was trying to get that as a prize. But something familiar? Evelyn asked. Ah, it's a snap-together kit, 26 said. She smiled fondly. They are pretty popular around Saturn. The box had some exaggeratedly action-wired of a spaceship on the front, shooting away from a large explosion. The ship was a black Mixball 106, a fairly uncommon light freighter from Luna, designed at the tail end of the Second Intrasystem War all the way until relatively recently. They were frequently converted to tackle other tasks and were all over the rings of Saturn. My parents used to have a small collection of those. The kits, I mean. We had a small cabinet in our hab. I think we had about 70 of them. My dad used to assemble them, and my mom loved painting them. They used to argue about realism versus making them look good all the time. That's cute. Nah, it's a common hobby, 26 dismissed. I never really kept up with it, but I have fond memories. Ah, what about you? Does anything jump out to you? Evelyn hummed, then smiled and pointed to a plushie. It was about 30 centimeters tall, of a woman in a dark suit with red eyes and with sharp teeth. The plushie was posed so that the character was munching on a small, soft chip. An Earth Alliance cruiser, if 26 were to guess, though it was so chip-ifed that really identifying it was impossible. Ah, is that the Empress of Mars? 26 asked. Of course not, see, the tag says Queen of Red Planet on it. And it was made on Earth. It's bootleg. Of course, 26 said. But everyone knows who it is, no? Aren't you a little insulted? Why would I be? Evelyn asked. 26 froze up for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. Because. Aren't you Martian? I suppose it is a little rude to depict the Martian Empress that way, Evelyn said. She glanced at 26, and there was nothing but amusement in her eyes. She knew. She knew that 26 knew. Probably, and she knew that 26 knew that she knew. Any more than that and they'll be twisting themselves up in logical knots, so 26 didn't push it. If Evelyn wanted to be Evelyn, then that was okay too. Look. They have pinball. I bet I can use my core to cheat a little, 26 said with a grin. Oh. That level of mastery already? Evelyn asked. Well, I'm getting there. If not, it'll be good practice, right? Yeah, good practice, Evelyn agreed. Sometimes she was just a silly mechanic, but that didn't mean she was stupid or unobservant. Interlude 10, The Silly Killer. She often had to remind herself that she was a cold-blooded killer. The people around her? These normies minding their normal business on board Driftwood? They could probably name fewer people than she had killed. It was something that kept her up at night. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, reminded of all the lives she had taken. It was not something that stopped her from pulling the trigger when her ship's lock-on buzzed. That's what she meant when she imagined herself as cold-blooded. Sure, she felt guilty about what she'd done, and sure she sometimes wished that she could offload all of that. But neither fact prevented her from launching Fox 1 at some hopped-up pirate in a junker-turned-corsair. Pixie took a breath, shook her head, then looked around herself. That was right, she was a cold-blooded killer. No reason to be afraid. She could look any one of the people around her in the eye and tell them that she killed motherfuckers for a living. Sure, she'd have to look up into their eyes, and sure she'd never killed someone in person, but those were just details. There was no reason for her to be afraid, because being afraid after being such a successful mercenary for so long was just kind of silly. That was the rationale that she was running through pretty much non-stop as she stayed low, something that came naturally to her and out of sight. Around her were the loud bangs of gunshots, cries of victory and dismay, the rhythmic thumping of some old bass-boosted electronic music. The arcade was a surprisingly busy place. She paused next to a fighter-sim game and scoffed as a pair of kids in a very simplified cockpit tried to chase down generic pirates. Amateurs. But she wasn't here to be unimpressed by some old arcade machines and games meant to entertain children and rob them of their cash. She was here on the lookout for her quarry. She slowly edged her head around a corner and spied the two she was following. 26 was standing next to Evelyn, a plastic mallet in hand. Evelyn had one as well, but she was barely holding onto the toy in a limp wrist while her focus was on the board ahead of both of them. The tops of some Earth Alliance solidars had popped out of a hole, and Evelyn's attention turned towards it. In that split second, the head was rammed back down into the machine with enough force to shake the whole thing. Then another came out, and another, and they were each knocked back into place with the kind of force that Pixie expected from the recoil on her assault cannon. One head remained sticking out of the board. It was from one of the holes nearest 26. She saw it, gasped, then swung down in a big two-handed swing that had her plastic mallet thumping against the head with a squeak. Pixie caught the praise Evelyn gave the smaller mechanic girl over the sound of a few more heads being crushed. After another minute, the machine reluctantly spat out a wad of tickets and the girls moved on to try something else. Pinball. They each grabbed a machine, though the term grab was a slight misnomer since Evelyn didn't seem willing to touch the one she chose. She was winning anyway, but that was besides the point. Pixie had been a mercenary and bounty hunter for just over a decade now, and while she was aware that part of that line of work often involved sleuthing and spying on people, it had never been her area. She was more of a hired gun than a private eye, even if she did rub shoulders with that sort on rare occasions. This was a whole other thing, though. She wasn't spying on either girl for selfish reasons. She was tailing them because there was something deeply wrong about Evelynville. Pixie had pulled up the woman's records, and they were faultless. Oh, a few bits of misbehavior here and there, some scuffles, a few social media posts that had opinions that were more popular 10 years ago than now, but there was nothing in her records that suggested that Evelynville was anything more than a perfectly competent astroarchaeologist. It had still felt off. The way she moved and talked suggested a military background, and more than just the normal mandatory service every Martian participated in. She wasn't even trying to hide her cores, her powers. And then, when Pixie started to dig into her ship's older records, she noticed a discrepancy. Evelynville had technically been around for a while, as far as records went, but those records were basically blank slates until a few weeks ago. Her ship had a few dozen terabytes of data stored on it. Records pulled out of various government databases that were of questionable legality to own, but which could come in handy when chasing a pirate down. She didn't always have the luxury of being able to hire an information broker, so she had those records on hand. She didn't update them very often, however, which was where the discrepancy came in. Evelynville was not Evelynville. Pixie was pretty sure that no one was Evelynville, in fact. The name was made up from the get-go, and it was done well enough that only someone very professional and very well-connected could have pulled it off. Which suggested Mint was involved. The woman named Evelyn and 26, whose records did all match up and whom Pixie suspected far less, finished playing pinball. 26 seemed to be gesturing quite a bit, and Evelyn nodded along. Then she pulled a small metal sphere from somewhere and had it float up and down. 26 listened attentively, then nodded, and when she was handed the ball she frowned at it in her palm for a while before shrugging. The taller of the two seemed to instruct 26 on how to do something as they walked down deeper into the arcade. Pixie followed. She was pretty sure that this was not nefarious. In fact, it looked like a pretty bog-standard date. Sure, one of the two was obviously a core user, but that wasn't impossibly strange. Just because they weren't doing anything strange didn't mean that she'd give up on following them, though. Pixie had a deep and burning kernel of anger in her chest. Anger and a lot of other emotions that she wasn't quite sure about. It was all Missy's fault. That woman had done things to Pixie's heart that she was only now fully healed from, and just when Pixie was starting to open up to the idea of moving on, Missy returned. She was nice about it, made the fact that she wasn't interested in anything pretty clear from the onset, and then pushed Pixie towards Evelyn with hints so loud they might as well be self-guided missiles. It didn't help any that Evelyn was Pixie's type. Tall, dark and mysterious. Yes please. That meeting Evelyn had led her to meeting 26 was also nice. The Saturnian was a true fan of Pixie's ship. But she was cute, enthusiastic, and made Pixie smile and laugh. If Pixie had interpreted 26's prattling about fleets correctly, then there was also a level of openness there that would mean plenty of space for even a wayward bounty hunter. The last woman in the little fleet, Aurora Sterlingworth, was a little cold, but she was also hot, so Pixie was willing to forgive the aloofness. She was tempted. Very tempted. But there were too many stories of good bounty hunters being led astray by a pair of long legs and a pretty smile for her to just jump in feet first. Did she want in on whatever they had going on? She poked her head around a corner and found Evelyn smiling while holding onto a large plush of what looked like the Empress of Mars, while 26 was laughing, her giggles carrying even over the constant flood of jingles in the room. Cute dates with cute girls? Pixie wanted that more than almost anything else in the world. She looked around the corner again and... No Evelyn? 26 was there, smiling as she looked at a small box of a model kit. No Evelyn though. Had the woman gone to the washroom? Maybe this was Pixie's chance to coincidentally run into 26? She could always pretend to be here for those silly fighter sims. A shadow fell over her, which wasn't too unusual. But this one felt particularly cold and unwelcoming. Pixie swallowed and glanced up. Evelyn was smiling. "Would you like to join us?" she asked. "We were just about to go find a bite to eat. A little something to snack on." Why did that sound like a lion inviting a mouse onto its plate? Pixie stood taller and worked hard to remind herself that she was a cold-blooded killer. A very silly killer. Interlude 1, everyone. She was done. Her newest invention, and honestly, one of her first, was sitting right there on her 3D printer's platter. Now all that it needed was a bit of assembly. When she had first seen the Sophos engineering bay, with its high-tech printer, she'd imagined all sorts of cool, niche parts. 26 didn't imagine that she'd be printing toys. So often and so soon. She cleared her throat and didn't think about that, though, because her newest device was going to change so many things. 26 cleared it off the printer tray, then gave it a thorough cleaning before she started to fit the interior mechanisms. There were two small motors, one for the servos that controlled the up and down flexibility, and another that just vibrated. That one had several adjustments to it, for intensity. 26 had to wipe her brow clean of sweat by the time she was done, and not because the work was hard. Well, it was hard, but oh no, her thoughts were spiraling. The very worst part of all of this was that she knew that Ivil was spying on her this entire time. Usually, knowing that her big, strong, scary girlfriend was watching over her felt nice. Right now it was downright mortifying. The device wasn't done quite yet. It needed its little fluid tanks filled, and it needed to be checked for leaks. 26 was a serious engineer, lack of education notwithstanding, and she wasn't going to make something like this without ensuring that it functioned. She watched as the device sprang into active mode at the touch of a remote's button, then returned to its more flaccid inactive state. Then she tested the vibrations. She was aware that she made plenty of noise in this room. It was an engineering bay, after all, but still, that humming noise made her impossibly worried that someone might overhear. And then she tested the fluid dispensary system. For some reason, she couldn't stop pressing the squirt button on her remote and giggling as the machine did its job. But enough giggles. If she wasn't off the mark, then the others were mostly in the dining room, which was just a quarter and a bit away from the engineering bay. If there was ever a time to field test her new device, then it was now. Which meant putting it on. 26 swallowed, then paced the room to psych herself up. She was definitely ready in a physical sense. That much she could feel with every step. "Come on, 26, she muttered to herself. "This is your time to shine." to prove that you're the top. Now somewhat more ready, she moved over to her workbench, gave the device a final check, and then undid her overalls. She wasn't wearing anything that would get in the way of the device as she strapped it into place. There was a little gasp as she inserted the bit that needed inserting. It was cold. Why hadn't she warmed it first? But it didn't matter. The closeness to her body would warm up the other end, she figured. Okay, she said as she took a few deep breaths. Then she looked down. She stared, then shook her hips a little and giggled. It wiggled in a very interesting way. 26 shook her head to clear it, then patted her cheeks a few times. Heads, yeah, in the game, she said before she adjusted all the straps and fasteners so that everything was appropriately snug. Then she pulled her overalls back up. There was a slight bulge at the front, but that was fine. 26 adjusted her shirt, fixed her hair, and made sure the remote for the device was appropriately hidden. She'd made a very clever little ring with a spinning dial that she could move with her thumb. It connected over Bluetooth. This wasn't what she ever expected to use her engineering skills on, but here she was anyway. It was time. She stepped out of the engineering bay and made her way through the corridor leading into the ship's dining room. Former dining room. It was now somewhat bigger than it should have been after Ivil complained that the sofa was too small on the inside. They had couches now. Plural. And multiple very large TVs and entertainment systems. The actual dining area was located further in, concealed by a few tasteful partitions. Aurora had a knack for interior decorating that surprised no one, but Pixie was also pretty talented with that kind of thing. Those two happened to be in the room now. Pixie was laying on one of the two-seater couches, barely taking up the entire thing while she read from a tablet, and Aurora was sitting on an armchair with a laptop on her lap. Missy was furthering, boots off as she painted her toenails. Across from her, Pepper was arguing with someone over the phone in a low, hushed voice. The only one missing was Ivil, and she stepped into the room and gave 26 the most knowing grin ever. 26 felt her cheeks warming up again, but she took a deep breath and calmed herself. Right. Now to. Fuck, 26 whispered. She knew that Aurora didn't like anyone swearing and she was making an effort not to, but... You didn't think this far ahead? Ivil asked as she took a seat in the middle of the largest couch like a queen taking a throne. Missy glanced up, then noticed 26. What's that? She asked, her attention obviously not on 26's eyes. I think 26 has something to tell us, Ivil said. She was smiling. The meanie. Everyone, 26 said. Aurora's laptop shut with a click, and Pepper hung up. The room suddenly felt very, very silent. Why had she not let the aircon system make a bit of noise, to fill it? Stupid need to keep everything in tip-top. Go on, Ivil encouraged. Everyone, she said. I've decided that I'm going to be top. Sexually, I mean. Missy blinked slowly. The whole concept of top and bottom is, at best, a gross oversimplification of sexual dynamics. You can't just frame things into a binary like that, it's reductive, and it calls back too strongly to heteronormativity. Relationships thrive in a spectrum more than anything. You shouldn't assign static roles to yourself, Missy said. 26 replied. I don't know, Ivil replied. I like it. For example, I'm at the top, and everyone else is a bottom by contrast. I have a penis. 26 yelled, which really did wonders to bring the topic back. Aurora started to cough, and she noticed Pixie very slowly glance down towards her crotch area. Since when? Pixie asked. Just now? It's still in beta? 26 said. Pepper stood up. I'll be away from whatever is developing here. Someone use summer freshener when you're done. And with that, she exited stage left. Interlude 11, The Silly Spy. She was pacing in her office, trying very hard to keep the screams within herself, rather than yell out her frustrations aloud. The office was hers, in a way. Well, it was more accurate to say that it was Mint's office and she was just borrowing it for the moment, but her name was on the front door. Peppermint's party planning. It was a small office run by Mint before the Empress decided to shack up in Driftwood Station. Mint had converted it into an event planning organization with 3 whole employees and a decently long made-up history around the Jovian system that no one ought to look too deeply into. It was tight, and not in the nicest section of the amalgam station, but it wasn't in the worst either. She had a desk, a small apartment, and a few amenities that were a luxury when living in a station. All things said and done, Mint was treating her as well as they could. She couldn't tell if it was because she had threatened to rip her handler a new asshole or if it was because of her proximity to the Empress. No, she could definitely tell which one really mattered to the intelligence agency. Pepper sighed, but continued her pacing. She didn't have the time, let alone the mental energy, to waste thinking about stuff that didn't matter. Her long-term career was in jeopardy, but she was also poised to launch that same career right up into the stratosphere. Handling the Empress was the not-so-secretive end goal of Mint. She was Mars' greatest military asset, and yet Mars had no real control over her. That was sometimes for the best, as her interests served as a counter to the political ambitions of some and the military ambitions of others. If the Navy had control over the Empress, Earth would be a barren husk and the entire system would be wearing the uniform by now. If a politician took control of her, then, well, that'd be horrific in strange and unique ways, certainly. Mint served to curtail those attempts at control while also trying to establish their own methods. They'd never been truly successful, but every step that ended with the Empress happy with Mint was a major accomplishment. Pepper had studied the agency's history. The unaltered, real history. Mint had once been on the verge of collapse, but a few lucky strokes had them inadvertently helping the Empress, and she casually mentioned the fact in the hearing of the media and some important figures. It had entirely changed the tides that Mint was drowning in. Right now, Pepper was the closest thing Mint had to a mouth poised next to the Empress ear. For the first time in the organization's history, they were the closest part of the Martian apparatus to the core of Mars power. Mint wasn't broadcasting the fact, because, well, they weren't that sort of people, but even Pepper could tell that the higher-ups were shifting anxiously, ready to make a few small, subtle moves with long-term potential tied to them. It was a lot of pressure on Pepper's back, and she was quite certain that she wouldn't succeed at her primary objective. It wasn't that she wasn't tempted by the Empress. Pepper licked her lips then shifted her shoulders a little. Ivil was undeniably attractive, both physically and in terms of power. Pepper would readily admit that in her current single state, she wouldn't mind spending more time with a woman. But the Empress had her eyes locked upon others, and Pepper might be a spy and an informant and very, very single, but she wasn't a homewrecker, orders be damned. If she couldn't be part of whatever strange harem was going on, then she could at least be Her Imperial Majesty's wingwoman. Pepper glanced at her desk. There was a stack of papers laying upon it. Actual paper. Unused these days except for when someone wanted to demonstrate their wealth or anachronistic tendencies, or when information had to be passed along in a very destructible form. The sheets clearly ordered her to destroy them upon her having read them. They'd even been delivered with a small lighter. Pepper had abstained from that for the moment. The pages were reports. Detailed to the point of nausea. Reports of movement across the solar system. Fleets of merchant ships that, when traced back to their origins, hinted at discrepancies. One merchant fleet had 19 ships within it. It had only had 14 3 months ago when a Martian patrol flew by. At some point, 5 more ships had joined the small fleet, but all of the previously noted appearances of that same fleet said that there were only 14. So either the long-range sensors of the patrol were wrong, which was possible, or someone had added 5 new ships to their fleet and disguised the fact. It wasn't the only strange happening. There was a small Earth Alliance battle group that was going through war trials and war games. Small being the operative term, because it only had half as many vessels as the average war game would have. Another area had some ships belonging to a small ship weapons developer doing tests on the edge of the asteroid belt. They were firing rounds at rocks. Nothing too special. Only Mint had dug into that company's history and discovered deep links to the Earth Alliance. There were a dozen more reports. Each was small, a drop in the bucket. A discrepancy that could be written off as coincidence, incompetence, or even subtle but not unusual enemy action. The Earth Alliance had their own intelligence apparatus and it too needed to move agents around. But taken all together, Mint admitted in the report that it was sheer coincidence that the several agents looking into various cases all happened to notice a pattern and started to compare notes. The incidents, charted on a map of the system, drew a line. A line from roughly where Earth sat at the moment, to right past the Jovian system and straight towards Uranus. Mint was mobilizing in a big way. Pepper imagined that if she wasn't in such a critical position, she might also be one of the lowly agents being tied to an outbound merchant ship with the goal of trying to spot some of the Earth Alliance elements moving further out towards the edge of the system. At the moment, it seemed like the League of Free Moons was still unaware, or their intelligence apparatus had yet to kick things into gear. So, Mint had stumbled across an Earth Alliance plot far from their own jurisdiction, and the blame for that could be placed on the Empress for moving to the area at a time where she really should have been around Mars. The Earth Alliance was rarely this subtle, but their goal here was obvious. The chase of new cores currently held around Uranus. It represented enough cores to catapult a nobody into the higher end of core user rankings. That would mean one more individual capable of causing mass disruption. Or, the new cores could be cultivated, reproduced, and disseminated throughout the Earth Alliance. In terms of short-term gains, it would mean little, but in 2 decades, when the 1,000 or so cores were suddenly 20,000 distributed across the Alliance. Or the Earth Alliance could consider giving all of those cores to a single person with a lot of cores already. One of their rankers, perhaps. It wouldn't be anywhere near enough to gain a second S-rank core user, but it would mean a second large threat. The most horrific idea, of course, was giving those cores to their own S-ranker. The Empress of Mars was one of 3 S-ranked individuals in the system. At the moment, she held a confirmed and rather important lead on the other 2, the Emperor of Jupiter and the Emperor of Earth. But this many new cores? That could, conceivably, be enough to cut that gap and narrow it down until the Empress was only as strong as the Emperor of Earth. That was, quite simply, unacceptable. The Emperor of Earth was a passant, whiny man that liked to lord over others, but who was too stupid and easily distracted to notice that he was well and truly chained by the leadership of the Earth Alliance. Given the opportunity, he would come to blows with Ivil Antagonist. Someone had to tell the Empress. She was right here. So close to Uranus. She could grab those cores for herself. She could secure them and give them to the League of Free Moons and earn herself, and Mars, a lot of goodwill. In any case, the Empress had to be informed, and the person so carefully chosen for the task was none other than Peppermint. She had to go up to the Empress currently having a dinner date where she was bullying that poor mercenary pilot and inform her that her dating time was going to be cut short. Pepper hoped she wouldn't take it out on her poor, silly spy. Chapter 82, an enjoyable bit of torture. Torture was ineffective. That didn't mean it wasn't fun. At the moment, Ivil was enjoying torture quite a bit. She was sitting on a simple seat in a nice enough restaurant a floor above the arcade they'd been at. The place was nice enough. It wasn't a high-end restaurant, exactly, but it wasn't a franchise either. The sort of place where the cook was also the owner, and where while the decor wasn't the best, it was still thematic and clean enough. This place in particular had a large bay window looking out of the side of driftwood, with a dock in the distance where they could see ships slowing down to come in for their final approach. The restaurant was cargo ship themed, which Ivil found to be a strange choice with the sitting areas all taken from actual ship lounges and the walls covered in blueprints and screens showing ads for ships that hadn't been sold since the end of the Second Inter-System War. 26 loved it, though, so Ivil found herself enjoying the space via osmosis. The girl was sitting across from Ivil now, bouncing in a booth with her feet tip-tapping on the grated metal floor. Next to her, Pixie was sitting on her hands, no not meeting anyone's eyes. Her feet didn't quite reach the floor. She was the current target of Ivil's torture. "So," Ivil said. "How long were you around the arcade?" "Ah," Pixie said. "Do you enjoy arcade games that much? Which are your favorite?" Ivil asked. "Are there any spy-themed games there that you particularly like, or are you there for the dating sims?" "Ah," Pixie continued. "Evelyn is just teasing you," 26 said as she placed a hand over Pixie's. Ivil noted the gesture. 26 was quick to touch and grab onto people when they were close. It was kind of her, though the touch seemed to make Pixie start a little. The woman stared at 26's hand over her own, and her already flushed face only grew warmer. "If she is being too mean, let me know, and I'll tell her to calm down." "I can hear you, you know," Ivil said. 26 grinned so hard her cheeks were pinching together. "I know," she said. "But it's true, isn't it?" "A little," Ivil admitted. "I do enjoy playing with my food. And doesn't Pixie just look like a delicious little morsel?" Pixie choked, then sat up straighter, almost as if trying to seem more intimidating. She didn't remove her hand from under 26's, which defeated the entire point. "I'm not a little morsel or a snack," Pixie said. "I kill people." "Ah yes," Ivil said. "I'm certain you have, but your kill count is a little anemic if you're trying to use it to scare me." Pixie's eyes narrowed. "Just count yourself lucky that you're so attractive, otherwise that kind of talk would just make you sound like an idiot." Ivil snorted, but 26 stepped in before the insults and the flirting could continue to fly too quickly. "Evelyn, Pixie, please don't fight," she said. Ivil relented, for the moment. She had the impression that this kind of fighting was exactly the kind of thing that Pixie enjoyed. But 26 was right, it was a little inappropriate for the middle of a restaurant while in the company of others. "You're right, forgive me," she said. The forgiveness was aimed at 26, but Pixie nodded all the same. "And I'm sorry too," Pixie said. "For accidentally spying on you. It wasn't what I was aiming to do, but I saw the two of you and I just followed along." "As one does," Ivil said. "I've done that before too, when I see someone very pretty," 26 said. Then she looked up to the two of them as they stared at her, and her cheeks slowly reddened. "Isn't that normal?" "No," Ivil said. "Oh." Ivil wanted to reach over and pat 26 on the head, but she wasn't sure if they were quite at that stage of their relationship yet. Actually, to be quite honest with herself, Ivil was a little conflicted about where, exactly, she was in this whole relationship thing. In her soaps, there was usually a period where the lovers made eyes at each other. She looked to 26 and their gazes locked. Ivil smiled kindly, and 26 returned the smile almost on reflex. Her dimples were showing and she looked quite pleased. So yes, that was one thing she could check off her list. Next, the soaps usually had the lovers become more intimate. It was usually quite carnal, though half the time it was off-screen and merely implied. Ivil was quite looking forward to that part. Her issue came with a bit after that. In her soaps, the characters were either in an established relationship already, in which case the breaking of that relationship, the death of a character, or some steamy B-plot would mess with said relationship, all things she was keeping a keen eye out for, or the characters were in the process of falling in love. There was nothing about the actual post-early dating bit. Ivil was aware that there had to be a step between falling in love and marriage, but none of the media she consumed so avidly covered it in any details, and as she was slowly approaching that stage she could admit to herself, in the privacy of her own mind, that she was quite nervous. It was a little early to be so nervous, however. She still hadn't revealed her true identity to either 26, or Aurora, and Pixie was just as clueless. That was her own fault for being so good at restraining herself and keeping things subtle. For now, back to teasing. An auto waiter arrived and listened to their orders before zipping away, and within a few minutes a flesh and blood waiter came and set down their drinks. Since this was a themed restaurant, they were served in squeezable, no-spill drink sacks, the kind of thing used in a zero-G environment when there were no other options. 26, at least, seemed to enjoy the novelty. "We could never afford these around Saturn." You just need to get good at splashing whatever you're drinking directly into your mouth. There's a trick to it though. And so she went on for a while about how to make liquids roll into small, swallowable balls. The conversation didn't become any smarter. Pixie complained at length about the rations she could eat on board her ship and how she desperately wished for enough room to fit a bed of kitchen space within it, and Ivil added her own mostly forgotten stories about military-grade rations. It had been a long time since she'd had to suffer through those. The evening was progressing quite well, in her estimation. The girls were laughing, the tension that Pixie had started with faded away, and they traded gossip and banter without any real issue. Which was why Ivil was instantly irritated when she felt Pepper slipping closer. Not because she didn't like the Mint operative's presence, but because the woman was twiddling her hands together and had the kind of tenseness to her that only came from someone under a lot of stress who didn't think they were being observed and who were walking to deliver some bad news. Ivil had long ago learned to notice that exact walk. It reminded her of someone working up to their own gallows. "Forgive me, a moment," Ivil said as she carefully stood up. Pixie patted her lips with a napkin. "Want us to come with?" she asked. "No, it's fine. Stay here and enjoy your meal, I'll be right back," Ivil said with a dismissive little wave. 26 eyed her for a moment, then smiled and nodded. She could be surprisingly perceptive at times, Ivil knew. Or maybe she'd just realized that Ivil never used the washroom, and so if she was standing up now, it was definitely for something else. In either case, the Saturnian continued to chat with Pixie while Ivil made her way out of the restaurant and towards Pepper. They met in the middle of a long corridor, the spy stopping in her tracks as she finally noticed Ivil coming to stand before her. "Your Majesty," she said on reflex. "Yes," Ivil replied. "I take it the news isn't good." Pepper at least tried to hide her wince. "I do have some bad news, yes," she said. Ivil let out a breath through her nose. "Well, lay it on me," she said. "Is this place private enough?" Pepper asked. A faint twist of will and it was. "Go on," Ivil said. "Yes ma'am. Mint has noticed some movement across the system, particularly movement heading towards the Uranus system. All the ships have ties in one way or another to the Earth Alliance. Ma'am, we think that the Emperor of Earth might be trying to steal the newly discovered cores." Chapter 83, Standing. There were very few people who could stand up to her. Nominally, the leaders of Mars could tell her no. At least on paper. They knew better than to try, however, because no amount of written rules would stop her mild annoyance from turning their bodies into clouds of disparate atoms. Then there were the two emperors. When people charted out powers as humans were wont to do, the very top of the people you shouldn't fuck with pyramid was a small capstone that held 3 figures. The Empress of Mars, the Emperor of Jupiter, and the Emperor of Earth. All 3 titles were mostly nonsensical. She was the only one whose appointment as Empress was actually legally recognized, but Mars, being a single-nation world, didn't have enough kingdoms to actually make her an Empress. The Emperor of Jupiter didn't really care about the Jovian system at all, except that he lived there and he had some familial relations in the system. The Emperor of Earth, in Ivil's estimation, was a weak-willed, spineless little passant who was only called that because the Earth Alliance's PR division was terrified that their citizens would realize how far behind the power curve they were. The Emperor of Earth was an up-jumped-a-classer. According to conventional logic, in order for someone to become a C-classer, they needed more than 10 cores. B-class was hidden behind the lofty 100-core mark, and a classer was past 1,000. The 3 emperors all had 10,000 cores. But cores weren't all made equal. A well-practiced, well-balanced B-classer could whip an A-classer's rear, and while there was something to say about having lots of power, that wasn't the end-all be-all of anything. The Emperor of Earth only barely deserved the S-classer nomination, and Ivil suspected that she could get rid of half of her cores and still, to put it in technical terms, whoop his fool ass. And now he was sticking his idiot nose in her business, again. She pursed her lips as she considered the situation. He was definitely around. The idiot knew as well as she did that one couldn't always trust others to do things appropriately. Recovering that cache of cores around Uranus was a delicate enough matter that he wouldn't trust the Earth Alliance to do it. Even if they succeeded, the Earth Alliance's greatest weakness was their fragmented nature. It was an alliance barely of some 100-odd nations, each one would want a slice of that pie, and he'd be forced to split out thin slices for each of them in the end. He'd be left with a quarter of a pie by then, if the analogy held. That wasn't enough pie to make up much of the difference between himself and even the laid-back Emperor of Jupiter. Let alone the difference between himself and Ivil. Ivil started to pace. So, in all likelihood he was here himself. Sneaking across the solar system, past Mars and past Jupiter to get his grubby hands on that cache. Would it be enough to bridge the gap? If there were 1,000 or more cores there, then maybe. She doubted it, however. After the Third Intrasystem War. Well, there was a very good reason why Mars was far beyond Earth in terms of total cores owned. They had been much closer to parity before that massive war. Ivil had thinned out Earth's core users considerably. She even started to donate cores she didn't care about back to the Martian Navy. Empress? Pepper asked. The question had Ivil raising her head mid-pace. Have you come to a decision as to what to do? You may call me Ivil, if you wish, Ivil said. As you wish, Empress Ivil, Pepper said. Ivil grinned. The woman knew that may wasn't should. Mint had really sent someone clever. What would you do, in my position? Ah, Pepper said. She didn't immediately dismiss the idea, however. Her brows drew together, and the young woman thought about the issue for several long seconds. Hypothetically, I personally would put the safety of Mars ahead of my own romantic interests. I see, Ivil said. I suppose that makes sense, as far as responses go. And then what would you do, once you've come to that choice? Given that the Earth Alliance is trying to move with some subtlety. I suppose there are two courses of action? Oh. Ivil asked. The first would be to intercede personally. Hypothetically, with your level of personal power, you could stop this would-be theft, perhaps take the cores for your own. It would severely damage Mars' reputation in the region, but it would be better than allowing an adversary access to those resources. That's one course of action, Ivil said. And what's the other option? Pepper shifted slightly. Mars does have an amicable relationship with the League of Free Moons. Warning them could mean that they'll protect the core cache themselves. Perhaps they'd even be willing to accept Martian assistance in the matter? Oh, now isn't that just a delicious idea, Ivil said. She liked that. She liked it a lot. It would paint the Emperor of Earth like the little shit he was and make Mars look better for it. Though. It wasn't terribly subtle. I think I have an idea. A third option, of sorts, Ivil said. Ma'am? Pepper asked. Ivil nodded. I'm going to need you to arrange something for me. A meeting with the Emperor of Jupiter. Ah. Thank you, Pepper, you've been quite helpful. I'll be sure to let your superiors know. I imagine being my official contact with Mint would do wonders for your career, yes? Pepper swallowed. Yes, ma'am. Ivil did like rewarding useful, and cute, subordinates. She patted Pepper on the head. Let's go see 26 and Pixie. I think I have some news for them. Pepper seemed worried about that, for whatever reason, but she didn't protest as Ivil returned to the restaurant. She discovered that her meal had arrived. 26 was laughing, swaying from side to side and bumping her shoulder against Pixie's while the shorter woman recounted a story. And then I come in, and I lock everything I've got on their ship. It's like 100 times bigger than my nightshade. I'm out of ammo on half my guns, I've fired half my chaff, and I've got like 1 missile left. But I lock everything I've got in everything I don't onto them. They must have been shitting themselves. And then? 26 asked. She noticed Ivil and her grin grew, but that didn't interrupt Pixie much, though the mercenary did cut her story a little shorter. And then they paid me. Really quick too. I think implying that not paying me would make them pirates really encouraged them to get going with the money transfers. Anyway, long and short of it is that if you're doing an escort job, It's always better to be able to talk to the people in the ship you're escorting, not just the seat warmers back in their corporate office. Sounds like I missed a good story, Ivil said as she sat. Pepper paused, then smiled at the others as she sat next to Ivil. I'm sorry for interrupting your dinner, she said casually. I had some important news for Evelyn. What's up? 26 asked. She grabbed a handful of fries, put them on a smaller plate, and pushed it towards Pepper. We have some trouble coming up, Ivil said. Nothing too violent yet, but I think it might be good that you're here, Pixie. Yeah? Pixie asked. Ivil nodded. We might be hiring you, before anyone else can slip you a contract, even. Pixie leaned forwards onto her elbows. Sounds like you know something not a lot of others do. What's going on? The Earth Alliance might be trying to sneak by to steal the cash, of course, Ivil said. I believe that soon we might be leaving the station and rushing after them. Seeing as how they're trying to be subtle, we might be able to shoot past and mount a defense. Against an entire fleet? Pixie asked. I'm as confident in my skills as anyone, but I know my limits. Against an entire subtle, cobbled-together fleet, one designed to not seem like a fleet at all, Ivil said. Besides, it wouldn't be the first time I've had a fleet raid ahead of me. I've survived such things so far, and I'm far more confident in my skills than anyone else is. Pixie snorted, then leaned back into her seat. If this is true, you're talking about a big political mess. Yes. We ought to let Aurora know. She'd be able to twist this thing to some sort of advantage. I too often tend to fix others' problems violently, then have to encourage them to reward me for it. It's much simpler if they agree to the reward beforehand, Ivil said. She smiled smugly, then took a knife to her meal to cut it into more bite-sized pieces. It occupied her hands. She was still able to notice the passing look of discomfort on 26's face. Was something wrong? It was definitely something she'd have to look into. 26's returning smile and good mood wasn't quite enough of a disguise for Ivil to just drop it and pretend that she had seen nothing. If that rat bastard Emperor ruined 26's happiness, she'd rip him apart. Marsma's special. A long time ago, when everyone lived in great domes and the surface of Mars wasn't a livable place, Marsmas wasn't a thing. There were no glowing wreaths and no feast of the red sky. This was before dust cookies were even invented. This was a time where no gifts were handed out to good little Martians, and where naughty children bullied and ruled. But this all changed one day, when the Empress of Mars saw from her lofty throne that the children of Mars were sad and unhappy. They were tired, working all the time, and barely had enough to get by. The children didn't laugh or play. They just sat quietly, afraid of what might happen if they stepped out of line. That made the Empress frown. Well, this won't do at all, she said. Mars is mine, and it should be a place of fun. But how do I make them happy? Then, the idea struck her. She'd heard stories about a jolly old man on Earth who flew through the skies, bringing gifts to good children. I'll do that, she said, but I'll do it my way. And so the first Marsmas began. The Empress didn't bother with reindeer or slees. She had a shiny, red, rocket-powered sled that zoomed faster than the speed of sound. She filled it with gifts. Glowing spheres that floated and sang, tiny machines that could build anything, and even delicious treats that never ran out. But she packed her sled with one more thing, her appetite. Oh, yes, the Empress said, this will be fun. I'll give gifts to the good children, but the naughty ones, well, they'll make a nice snack. On Marsmas Eve, the Empress zoomed across the red skies, her rocket sled leaving a trail of golden sparks. She visited every city, from the grandest towers to the smallest domes. She slipped into homes with her strange powers, moving faster than anyone could see. To the good children, she left gifts under their holographic trees. Maybe a girl who helped her neighbors woke up to find a new robotic pet. Or a boy who shared his food with his friends found a gadget that could grow plants in seconds. But the naughty children weren't so lucky. If a child lied too much or hurt others for fun, the Empress didn't leave a gift. Instead, she ate the snacks left out for her, and sometimes, She'd look at the child and say, maybe next year. If you're better. The worst of these children? They were gobbled up whole. By the time the sun rose over Mars, the Empress's work was done. The good children laughed and played with their new toys, and the naughty ones tried to be better, just in case. From that day on, every Martian knew Marsmas wasn't just about gifts. It was a time to be kind, to help each other, and to do what was right. And every year, the Empress of Mars would look down at her people and smile. Good, she'd say, they are learning. Then she'd plan her next Marsmas, knowing it was her favorite time of year. Asterisk. Ivil closed the book and smiled a self-satisfied smile. So, what do you think? She asked. Did you actually eat naughty children? 26 asked. No, not about that, Ivil said. Maybe this wasn't a good idea. Chapter 84, Patterns. They returned to the Safo. The ship was sitting, waiting for them, and even before they arrived, Ivil knew that Sonic Spectre was by the entranceway, reading from a datapad, and Aurora was in her room, doing much the same but cuter. Interestingly, Missy wasn't there, and it seemed like the corner she'd marked out for herself had been mostly cleaned out. Interesting. Something to look into later, at least. As they approached, they crossed through a large windowed corridor that gave them an unobstructed view of the docking station. The Held Together was there, a crew pulling back a gantry crane and some small repair drones from its engine housing. Next to it was the much smaller and sleeker form of the Safo. That's your ride? Pixie asked as she approached the glass and leaned forwards. Yup. 26 said. That's the Held Together over there, and that's the Safo. Nice names, Pixie said. The older ship is the Held Together, I take it? Looks like it's barely living up to its name. She's a toughie, 26 said without really contradicting the small pilot. Pixie nodded. Some old ships are like that. I love my Night Stalker, and I wouldn't trade it for much, but there are some real old fighter craft out there that still kick ass. You'd need to upgrade them a fair bit, and most are heavy and a little over-armored, but they are still around because they are just that good. Old ain't always bad, is what I'm trying to say. 26's grin could have lit up the room. I agree. The other ship, that's not a normal pattern, is it? Looks like something I've seen a few belt pirates use. We stole it, Ivil said. From some pirates in the belt. It's ours now, by right of conquest. Pepper blinked, no doubt trying to work out how pirating pirates looped back around to making the theft acceptable. Ivil didn't particularly care about the legality of it. It felt like a morally acceptable thing to do, stealing from thieves, and she rarely concerned herself over morals to begin with. That'll do it, Pixie said. It's a nice little gunboat. What's she armed with? 26 perked up at the query and started listing off the Safo's armaments. Pixie nodded along, then pointed out that they had some spots that could be turned into hardpoints with a bit of work, either disguised or not. Things that could turn the relatively small ship into a heavy hitter for its size and weight class. You'll want to upscale the top gun. It's just not good. Pirates cheap out on the weirdest things sometimes, but I really think that in this case it's an issue of machining capabilities. They just can't make bigger, more reliable turreted weapons for whatever reason. They'll up-armor everything though, but that just makes them tougher to crack. Ivil hummed. We'll see about replacing the main gun, then. Yeah, and that space under the bridge. That's a lot of empty room with nothing in it. You could fit a small missile pod module there, no problem. Even if they're just small hunter-seekers, that'll give any fighter craft chasing you something to worry about, Pixie said. What about the rest of the hardpoints? 26 asked. Not all bad, but your point defense has very limited range. You're going to need at least one more on your dorsal area for full coverage. If I was attacking you, I'd try to come in quiet from your top. Sure, it's within range of your main gun, but you have no anti-missile in the direction. It's kind of a glaring flaw. The side-mounted laser turrets are whatever. Huge power draw for relatively little, but they're versatile and you probably have a large enough reactor and battery bank to make it work. Ivil eyed the vessel. It was nice enough, she supposed. She'd started to think of it rather fondly, more so than just about any ship she had ridden on previously, but that had less to do with the vessel itself and more with the people on board. She had been just as pleased on the Hell Together, and just as empty aboard the Imperial Star Dreadnought Purgatorial Oblivion. They made their way down a level, then to the airlock bridge leading into the Safo. The ship sat there, quiet and patient until they shuffled through the airlock. "Bit tight in here," Pixie said. "Still, nice to have working room in your ship." "It's cozy," 26 said as they waited for the last of the airlocks to cycle. Pixie tensed up as the bulkhead door opened and she discovered Sonic Spectre, in her full-tech Made of Mars habit, waiting just beyond. "Pendergast," Ivil said. "Could you please gather everyone in the briefing room? We have matters to discuss." "Of course," she said promptly with an accompanying bow. "I'll notify the others immediately." "Thank you," Ivil said. She could appreciate the efficiency. "Does anyone want anything before we begin? The kitchen space is just below, Pixie, and the bridge is up here." "I guess I could use a drink," Pixie said with a shrug. "Oh. I'll go get Aurora," 26 said. "And I'll ask Sana to make tea. She has a whole tea set, and I've been meaning to try some for a while now." Ivil supposed that turning an important meeting into a tea party wasn't the worst thing that could happen. She watched 26 dart off, then gestured ahead, leading the ever-quiet Pepper and the curious Pixie towards the front of the vessel. The bridge wasn't designed as a meeting space, but there were plenty of consoles with seating, and the half-moon arrangement of them and their swivel chairs meant that the room could serve as that kind of space in a pinch. Pixie checked out the pilot's seat, then plopped herself down into it. She was far too small for the seat, and Ivil had to restrain herself from mentioning booster seats to allow her to reach the yoke. Sonic Spectre returned soon enough, carrying a tray with her tea-making operati, and she was soon followed by Aurora and 26. There was a moment wasted as Aurora greeted Pepper and Pixie, asked about their days, and made some meaningless small talk as she was wont to do. Ivil remained patient through it all. Aurora would do as she would, her being charming and friendly was part of her nature, and Ivil wasn't about to deny it. Soon enough, however, the room filled with the bittersweet aroma of tea as Sonic loitered around her tray with the unfolding legs. Ivil took the captain's seat, Pepper sat herself at the rear, out of the limelight, Aurora took over the communications console, Pixie the piloting station, and 26 sat on the floor, her legs splayed out in a most unladylike fashion. "May I begin, or would that interrupt the flow of your tea ceremony?" Ivil asked. Sonic Spectre paused, and she was clearly weighing the merits of speaking truthfully versus inconveniencing Ivil in a small way. "The brewing is complete. All that remains is pouring everyone a cup to enjoy while the tea is still warm. Do you want sugar and milk?" Ivil smiled. "Both, please." Sonic bowed, and soon she was passing out teacups and saucers to everyone, as well as maneuvering a floating plate about, one covered in small biscuits and thin chocolates. Ivil waited for a moment more before relaxing into the captain's seat. "Let's not make this anything too formal. I've received some news that I've shared with most of you already, but what we do about it is important, and I wish to discuss that." "News?" Aurora asked as she held her cup in delicate fingers. "Yes," Ivil said. "The Earth Alliance is hidden, in a manner of speaking, an attack force across this area of the system. They are consolidating now. Their heading is Uranus. The core cache." Aurora gasped. Sonic, the only other member not yet informed, didn't react so obviously, but her attention was felt. "That's what I suspect as well," Ivil said. "The League of Free Moons might be keeping this somewhat under wraps, at least with the media, but I imagine there are plenty of ways information about the cache leaked to the Earth Alliance. Spies aren't my thing, but I can't imagine such news staying out of their grasp." Aurora stood and started to pace. She only paused slightly to take a quick sip from her teacup. "This could be a disaster. If the Earth Alliance captures the cache, that'll be casus belli for every moon in the system. But it'll also mean a significant increase in Earth's power." "Not so significant," Ivil said. "The Alliance could wipe the League out all on their own with relative ease. The Free Moons are still a small faction, all things considered. Aurora frowned, but didn't attempt to correct Ivil on the matter. Likely she was well aware. Does the League know? Perhaps. I only just found out, Ivil said. In any case, I'm tempted to stop them, but I want to know your opinion on the politics of the matter before I go around knocking heads together. Chapter 85, Worrywart. Aurora really knew how to worry. Ivil had to restrain herself from smiling as she watched the woman stand up from the Combs console and start to pace the room. She did so while still holding on to a saucer and teacup, so her every step trailed faint, tea-smelling vapors. We need to take a step back and look at the wider picture here, she said. Go on, Ivil replied. There are more than just 3 factions in this game, but I think for the sake of simplicity, we can roll several into a single player, so to speak. The Earth Alliance is an alliance of several nations. The Emperor of Earth is only popular with some of those, which makes any actions he takes somewhat contentious. In any case, this scenario implies that the entire alliance isn't behind it. Do you think the rest of the year would do anything about it? 26 asked. Doubtful, Pixie said. When accusations start flying, they tend to band up. Aurora nodded and she seemed to agree with the general sentiment there. The other factions are Mars, who despite having minimal influence in the grander scheme of this particular incident, there's a slight possibility that, they'll get involved. Aurora glanced at Ivil from the corner of her eye. Ivil's response was to perk an eyebrow up. The young noble lady cleared her throat. Finally, we have the other big player in this. The League of Free Moons, Aurora said. That's not really just one faction, is it? 26 asked. It's like 24 moons doing their own thing, trying to all work together a little. It's a very young faction. For the purposes of arguing, I think we need to assume that the League will at least try to come together over this. Every moon is allowed a slice of the pie, the same proverbial pie that the Earth Alliance is trying to steal off the windowsill. Your analogies are a little dated, Ivil said. Aurora shrugged. As long as we're all on the same page. So, first, let's make sure we really are on the same page. Evelyn, you said that you got information that a fleet was moving to Uranus composed of Earth Alliance vessels. I did, yes, Ivil replied. How certain are you of this information, and where did you get it from? Ivil considered it for a moment. The truth would be complicated, but obfuscating the truth, even when meaning well, was the cause of several season-long arcs filled with drama and trouble in her soaps. I got it from a Mint operative. Mint thinks it's true, at least. Aurora's pacing stopped with a squeak of her shoe on the bridge floor. She stared at Ivil for a moment. A Mint operative? Yes, Ivil said. They have a vested interest in not lying to me. A few emotions flit by on Aurora's face. Confusion, conflict, then determination. Are we ripping the bandage off, now? She asked. Ivil tilted to the side, her weight falling on one elbow as she repositioned herself in the captain's seat. She imagined she looked a little coxer at the moment. If you want to, go ahead. Oh, 26 said. Pixie scanned everyone in the room, from the still-standing Aurora to Sonic Spectre, who was still kneeling next to her tea set, and even Pepper in the corner. What's going on? She asked. Aurora's tongue darted out to wet her lips. Evelyn has been keeping things from us. Not with malicious intent, Ivil said. Keeping things from others can often be pretty malicious, Pixie said. What, are you a Mint agent or something? I'm not a Mint agent, Ivil said. And if my intent was malicious, you'd be Star Matter by now. I am quite decisive when it comes to maliciousness. No, this is a whole other thing, a little more complex, but I've been nothing but truthful in all matters not having to do with my identity. Aurora set her cup down, surprisingly without even a faint rattle as it alighted onto its saucer. She locked eyes with Ivil, the tension in her shoulders softening. I don't think it matters who you are, Evelynville. Let's just focus on the matter at hand. I think it's less complicated. Less complicated? Pixie asked. This might spark a whole new intrasystem war. Yes, less complicated, Aurora said. Ivil smiled slightly. A pragmatic approach. I can appreciate that. She crossed one leg over the other, a lazy action that nonetheless drew Aurora's eye. Very well, let's continue that way, then. Aurora nodded sharply, pulled up her cup, and took a quick sip. There's no reason to hold back information, then. The League, as soon as they learn, will respond. Will Mint be informing them? No, but they should be sending a message to the Emperor of Jupiter, Ivil said. Aurora's hand went to her face and she pinched the bridge of her nose. Is that bad? 26 asked. No. I have had my issues with that man, but he's rather level-headed, and I suspect he would back the League if push comes to shove, Ivil said. They'll know soon enough. So, basically, Pixie said as she leaned forwards. She had taken one sip of the tea, made a face, and set it aside. It was probably not sweet or caffeinated enough for her. We know about a huge covert op being run by one of the three scariest people in the system, and other than us and an intelligence agency, the only other person who knows is one of the other three scariest? All three emperors are well informed, or should be, Ivil said rather smugly. She ignored the stink eye Pepper gave her from the corner. In any case, you're correct, Pixie. They are trying to be subtle about this. This isn't a massive fleet movement, but it's probably large enough of a force to sweep in, take what they want, and leave before whatever defenses Uranus has connect. That won't be much, Aurora said. Uranus might have a small anti-piracy fleet, perhaps a few larger ships for defense, but nothing that could stand up to a modern military. That's one of the great failings of the League at the moment. We don't have a centralized force worth anything. The CFO is pretty fast, 26 said. Could we make it there before they do? Certainly, Ivil said. I could strap my fighter to this ship, Pixie said. But while I do think I'm one of the best fighter pilots in the system, and I have the kills to confirm it, I can't take on a fleet. Even a small one. It might come down to a negotiation, Aurora said. One that we can't exactly do from here. If the Earth Alliance fleet arrives and finds resistance set up already, they might not even try anything. It's one thing to pull off a massive heist like this and come away with 1,000 cores while bloodying the League's nose. It's entirely another to suffer heavy losses and come away with nothing. Victory justifies many ills, Ivil said with a nod. And if they find out that Evelyn is there? 26 said. Ivil grinned. Then even if the Emperor of Earth himself is there, they'll consider it long and hard before trying anything. Aurora eyed Ivil. You're having too much fun with this, she accused. I'm having an immense amount of fun with this, yes, Ivil replied. But not without reason. This might be exactly what you were looking for. Many of you. Pixie wants a great big battle where she can prove that she's the very best. You want something grand and impossibility political, where you prove that you're valuable to the entire League, to the entire system. Ivil paused and looked over to 26. The girl blinked back. I suppose we can give whatever ships we capture to 26? She has to start her collection somewhere? Collection? 26 asked. Of ships. Like those model kits you like so much. But more one-to-one in scale. With realistic battle damage, even. Aurora set her teacup down, staring at Ivil with a mix of exasperation and reluctant amusement. You're not even trying to hide how much you're manipulating all of us, are you? Ivil shrugged. It's not manipulation if everyone benefits, is it? Yes it is, Aurora said. That's still well within the definition of manipulation. Oh, Ivil said. Well then, let me manipulate all of you into going on a small trip across the solar system to save your precious League and to prevent that upstart Emperor of Earth from padding his ego even more. It'll be like a traveling date? Dating is so weird, 26 muttered. Ivil nodded. It could be, sometimes. Chapter 86, Plans Best Made. Sometimes the discussion ended before it had truly ended. This was one of those moments. Aurora insisted that regardless of what they did, being near Uranus was the first thing they should do. That meant preparing the CFO for an immediate launch. That was, of course, easier said than done. They needed permission from the dock. Pixie needed a special coupler ordered in order to be able to link her fighter to the SFO while in motion, and they needed some traveling supplies for what would be a several-day-long trip across a good portion of the solar system. Uranus wasn't next door, exactly. It happened to have an orbit that made it relatively close at the moment, but relative wasn't much. Of course, for a ship as small as the SFO, Ivil could give it a little boost to get it moving along a little faster than it ought to. A ship that weighted far less than it should would find its thrust efficiency raised quite a bit. Pixie ran off to get what she needed to connect her ship to the SFO. Aurora started to argue with the docking authority while placing several very rushed calls to political figures, notably the representative for Uranus that they'd spoken to and whose name Ivil couldn't be bothered to remember, and 26 wandered the ship, wiping some things clean, checking fluid levels in other places, and generally making sure the ship was in perfect condition. Pepper and Sonic didn't have as much to do, though Pepper bowed out and slipped away. She said that Mint would want her to inform them that the Empress was about to start a Category 5 kerfuffle. "Are things going according to how you expected them to?" Sonic asked. Ivil shifted the captain's seat left and right, the toe of one shoe touching the ground. "I suppose, a little. I am quite pleased with the candidates we have. I'm less pleased with the overall situation." She continued to shift from side to side. "Sonic, have you ever dated?" Sonic paused for a moment, then she continued to clean off and store her tea-making equipment with janky, stuttering motions. Her cores were healing, Ivil noted. "I have, in the past. Not for very long. I had to make a choice between my career and love, and what I had, I realized, was little more than infatuation." Ivil said. "What do you do once you're done with the first part of dating? After you're certain that you're going to be with someone? What's the next step?" "I believe that depends on the couple. Make some assumptions," Ivil suggested. Sonic paused again, then nodded. "From the top, then. For Miss Sterlingworth, officially dating will mean presenting yourself with her in public places and being folded into her schemes. It will involve a lot of publicity and politics, but I think you'll find that life away from the limelight with her will be far more domestic. Simple things." "I see," Ivil said. She liked the sound of that. "With Miss 26? I believe there might be a real trap there." "A trap?" Ivil asked. "Yes. 26 is inexperienced and might end up overly dependent on you. I don't think you want a emotional limpet. She has a backbone now, but she's also very influenceable and easy to bend." Ivil frowned. She kind of saw what Sonic meant, but she didn't exactly enjoy the implication. "Can you explain further?" she asked. "She has no expectations about love. If you want nothing more than a simple domestic life, then she'll give you that, but she will never flourish. Her talents have been honed by difficulty and strife and danger. By coddling her and giving her all she needs, she will never live up to her own talent." "Ah," Ivil said. "So, I have to challenge her?" "No, you don't have to do anything of the sort. She needs to want to challenge herself," Sonic said. "Aurora has no such difficulty. Give her everything you have and she'll strive for more. Her issue is being pulled back from her ambitions. 26 has no ambition because ambition comes after you're done working hard to live." Sonic tilted her head a little. "At least, that's what I believe. I don't have a perfect read of the situation or the women in question." "And the others?" Ivil asked. "Missy seems to be out of the running. She was not long-term material in any case. Maybe if all your eminence wanted was a one-night stand. Miss Pixie is interesting. She straddles the line between 26 and Aurora well. She has ambitions that you could only tangentially assist with. She has a name and a reputation already, so she wouldn't be entirely dependent on you. And she's small and cute," Ivil pointed out. "Two important facts." "Yes, I suppose so," Sonic agreed. She glanced up towards the bridge's entrance as a figure came to stand there. 26? The young woman was fidgeting with her hands as she looked across the room to Ivil. "Hey," she said. "Hello," Ivil replied. "Do you mind if we talk?" she asked. Privately? Sonic stood. I was finished packing in any case. I need to place this in my room, so I'll leave you two to it. Good evening. Ivil nodded her goodbye to Sonic, then gestured to one of the seats nearby for 26. What did you want to talk to me about? Is something wrong with the SFO? If you didn't spot it before now, it's hardly your fault. Huh? Oh, no, I doubt there's anything wrong with this ship that I didn't notice, she said. What's wrong is me. 26? Ivil asked. She shifted an arm up, grabbing her own elbow as if trying to make herself look smaller. I know who you are, she said. Okay, Ivil replied. Okay? 26 asked. I'm known for many things. Being subtle isn't one of them, Ivil admitted with a shrug. That does help when I try to be subtle, because my foes don't expect it, but it does also mean that I can't fault you for putting 2 and 2 together. Oh, okay, 26 said. Well, I'm me, and you. Entirely accurate, yes. No, I mean Ava. Ivil. I'm just a girl that can do basic maintenance and can read a manual. You. I deserve to maybe become someone working at a nicer station one day, doing repairs on cargo ships. You're the Empress. 26 took a deep breath. I think I'm going to go back to the hell together. The captain's about to head out in a day or two, once we have clearance. There's some cheap cargo we can grab here and resell around Ceres for a good margin. We might even take on a passenger or two. And the captain has friends around Saturn. I might jump off when we make it there again. I think I have the hours worked and the experience to pull off a job at one of the nicer docks. Maybe I'll find someone there. Maybe. One day, it'll dash. Ivil stood and walked over. 26 stuttered herself to a stop as Ivil stood very, very close. She could feel the younger woman's warmth, her escaping breath tickled her lips, and Ivil could look down and lose herself in 26's teary eyes. I wouldn't stop you, Ivil said. Oh. It was a sound that meant nothing and everything. I don't put others in cages, gilded or otherwise, because I wouldn't accept being placed in one myself, she said. She didn't need to speak up. A whisper was more than enough for 26 to hear every syllable. But I've decided that I like you quite a bit. I don't think I've ever dealt with heartbreak before, but it wouldn't end me. Ivil reached up. She had touched 26 before. The girl was grabby, liked holding hands. But she had never run her hand over 26's hip before, or traced her fingers up the girl's side. Her fingertips felt like they were brushing against the surface of the sun. Her hand rose, breaking the touch for just a moment before her hand reached back and touched 26's neck. 26's eyes were locked on hers. She grabbed the younger woman's chin between forefinger and thumb. Before you run away, could I maybe tempt you to not? Tempt me? 26 whispered. Her voice broke. Ivil smiled. Just a little, she murmured before she leaned in. As far as kisses went, it wasn't magical. Lips meeting, 26's quick, surprised gasp though why was she surprised at this point? Stealing the air from Ivil's mouth. It was warm, smooth and delicate. It wasn't chaste, but it wasn't the desperate, passionate kiss of lovers. This was a promise of more, a signature at the bottom of a declaration of war, the first roar of artillery that announced the start of something spectacular. Ivil stepped back, and 26 almost stumbled forwards as she thumped back down onto her heels. If you want to go, then I'll never stop you. But if you want to stay, I think I'd like that, and I'm sure I can find a way to make you enjoy it too. Ivil smiled sad, a little upset, but understanding all the same as she walked around 26 and slid out of the bridge. Chapter 87, Tippy Tap Sanctuary. Ivil was in the sanctuary provided by her captain's quarters, alone except for Sonic Spectre who stood at attention a step and a half away from the door. She was carrying herself with all of the poise and dignity afforded to her by being the Empress of Mars. That is to say. Ivil squealed and did a tippy-tap dance in the middle of her room. I did it. I did it. We kissed, Sonic Spectre. Lips on lips. We traded saliva. Very well done, ma'am. Oh. The look in her eyes. I bet she wanted more. I want more. Should I go back and give her more? Wait, no, that's too much too fast. Can't come on too quickly. I should respect her and give her space. Unless she doesn't want respect? No, I think she'd appreciate that. I'm sure she would, ma'am. Ivil squealed a little more. She felt like what she imagined a schoolgirl would on discovering her first crush. She could dance from here to Mars and back. She could crush a solar system with her glee alone. It was all she could do to contain herself and not light up this part of the Jovian system like fireworks going off at a festival. She felt lighter. She was lighter. In fact, things were starting to float around the ship in general until she put a stop to that. Sonic. Ivil snapped. Yes? I believe I am in love and I don't know what to do about it, Ivil said. When I wanted things previously, I'd merely burn, kill, and destroy my way to having what I wanted, but this is far more complex than that. I imagine it is, Sonic replied. But I think you're doing well, so far, and restraining yourself. I imagine that this will reflect well in the eyes of the women interested in you in return. Ivil considered it, then nodded. You're right, of course. The secret is all but out now. I don't need to make as much of an effort to disguise myself, and yet if I allow myself to just go wild I'll destroy what trust I've built so far. They believe me to be the sexy, hot, all-powerful Empress of Mars who has a cool head and who is confident and powerful and attractive. All things which I am. Of course. But which will be blemished if I can't control myself and continue to be more human around them. She nodded. She'd known this already, of course, but it was good to put into words. Thank you, Sonic Spectre. You've been exceptionally useful to me. I'll be certain to reward you for your assistance. The tech mate of Mars bowed. It is both my duty and my pleasure, Your Majesty. Of course, Ivil replied, repeating the maid's platitude back to her. Obviously, if you tell anyone about my last outburst in a way that reflects poorly upon me, I will invent a new kind of suffering. Something so wretched and vile that the universe itself will recoil at its creation, then I will subject you to it for literal and metaphorical eternities. Sonic bowed a little lower. I would never. Ivil eyed her for a moment, then ambled over to her bed and sat down. She crossed her legs one over the other and leaned against the air. Now, I'm quite excited, obviously and for good reason, about my current relationship growth, but that doesn't mean that I'm not cognizant of the greater, let's call it, political issue at hand. You mentioned to Pepper that you wished to get in touch with the Emperor of Jupiter? Sonic asked. Yes, but now I'm wondering if it's worth the trouble, Ivil said. He's very annoying to deal with. Perhaps the only person whom I can't bully into doing as I wish. He's not more powerful than I in most respects, but a battle between us would last weeks at the least and might well leave the Jovian system as something of a mess. I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you didn't fight him. Yes, Sonic replied. Exactly. Ivil uncrossed her legs then leaned to the side. What kind of asset do we have at our disposal for this? There is a tech-made cruiser nearby, Sonic replied. It would come to the call, if you asked it to. I suppose. That could be a small threat. So many core welders in one small ship. I suppose I could call on the Martian Navy as well. All of it, ma'am? Sonic asked. Well, they could leave some ships behind for defense, Ivil demurred. Ah, but no. This is a situation that's in the hands of the League of Free Moons. Ivil sat up straighter. Ma'am? Sonic asked at the sudden motion. Where is the Emperor located? She asked. Of Jupiter? Generally, he resides in a station in Ganymede's orbit, Sonic said. It's a relatively large station, built out of the crust of one of Jupiter's smallest moons and relocated into Ganymede's orbit some 10 years ago. And where is the League of Free Moons based out of? Ganymede, Sonic Spectre said. Did you realize something, ma'am? I think so, she said. Ivil nodded, then adjusted her outfit before making for the door. We're heading to Ganymede. Now, ma'am. Well, within the next few hours. Contact Pepper, let her know. If you happen to encounter 26 or Pixie, let them know as well. I'll let Aurora know myself. Sonic Heart sighed, tugging her skirts up from the inside with hidden arms while her more humanoid hands folded themselves over her waist. As you say, ma'am. I'll inform the crew of our imminent departure. Thank you, Ivil said before slipping out of the room. Now she just had to find Aurora. Which was easy, seeing as how she had several cores keeping track of the woman and could pinpoint her location to the millimeter. Ivil navigated her way across the corridor and to the door into Aurora's room. She knocked. Yes? Aurora asked. Ivil took that as permission to open the door and step in. Forgive the intrusion, she said as she tried to make the fact that she was breathing in the scent of Aurora less obvious. Evelyn, Aurora said. She was dressed down a little, in sweatpants and a loose shirt. She was fully covered, and yet it still somehow seemed deeply intimate when Aurora wasn't dressed formally. Is something the matter? Yes, Ivil said. We'll be departing in a few. Departing? Aurora asked. I thought we had time. Very little. And perhaps less than I'd thought, Ivil said. So, to Uranus. Ivil shook her head. To Ganymede. Aurora was far from stupid. She put 2 and 2 together in less time than it would take some to blink stupidly. The Emperor of the League? She asked. The Emperor, Ivil said. I should say hello while I'm so close to his throne. And in any case, he'll want to know about the Emperor of Earth's idiotic plan. He is at much greater risk. Or would be. The Emperor of Earth could use this power-up to finally overtake the Emperor of Jupiter, and a decisive fight between the two could end in the Emperor of Earth tipping the balance all the way to his side. Ah, Aurora said. She frowned, then reached over for a tablet, only to put it back down. Would he assist you? The Emperor of Jupiter? Doubtful. He's fat and lazy, Ivil said with an unconcerned shrug. You would say that, Aurora said. Well, if we are going to Ganymede, I'll have to insist on stopping at the League headquarters. I would have to go there at some point. I might not be able to escort you, Ivil said. I can handle myself, Aurora said. Perhaps not against someone of your caliber, but I'm not defenseless. I can hire help. Ivil perked an eyebrow at that. There's a cruiser of the Tech Maids of Mars here. I suspect that if you asked kindly, they'd gladly provide an escort. They are affiliated with Mars. Barely, Ivil replied. And isn't Phobos the same? Aurora pursed her lips cutly, then puffed her cheeks out. Okay, fine, she said. Miss Pendergast has been quite kind and professional, and I hope that the rest of her religious order is similarly kind and professional. You know, that's not her actual name, I don't think, Ivil said. Aurora's expression went flat. Do we want to start talking about fake names, Miss Evil? A discussion for later, perhaps, Ivil acknowledged. That's what I thought, Aurora said with a small, self-satisfied nod. I really want to kiss you, Ivil admitted. Aurora blinked, and suddenly her smugness was replaced by flushing and a fair bit of confusion. Ivil enjoyed the sudden change immensely. Why yes, well, we have a lot of politically sensitive work to do. Now shoo, I need to get changed. Later, then, Ivil replied with a grin. She did another tippy-tap dance in the privacy of the corridor. Chapter 88, Ready to Go. We're ready to go, Captain. 26 said. Her face was displayed on a little screen currently capturing the inside of the engineering room at the back of the SFO. She grinned and gave them a wave before falling back onto a seat and buckling herself in. The bridge was pretty quiet at the moment. Ivil was in the captain's seat, legs crossed while she ignored the little flashing light that was reminding her to put on her seatbelt. Such things were for mortals. She surveyed the room. Aurora had found her place behind the communications console again, though she had one of her many little tablets with her so that she could do work while they were in flight. Ivil wanted to be a little exasperated, but Aurora was a very career-minded woman and she wouldn't get in the way of that. Pixie was in the pilot's seat, being by far the best suited to the task. Her little fighter craft was currently docked onto the SFO's side via an ingenious temporary docking station. It would be a nightmare for her ship to retether itself if she disconnected it, But until then, she could get in and ride her fighter out whenever she wanted. The only other person on the bridge was Sonic Spectre, who was manning the gunnery station, with the ship's sensors linked in, while at the back of the bridge, sitting on a seat mounted to the wall and designed to fold into itself to be tucked out of the way, was Pepper the Mint operative whom Ivil suspected wanted to be elsewhere. "Well then," Ivil said. "Detach from Driftwood Station, it's time to head out towards Ganymede." "Space Traffic Control wants us to wait another 3 minutes," Aurora said. She had a pair of rather large and cumbersome-seeming headphones on, but only over one ear. She was paying more attention to her tablet's screen than to what the STC was telling her. Ivil leaned in a little and glimpsed at the screen. A chat log. She noticed that several of the names in it had tags for different moons, and she even recognized a name or two. Ah, so a chat channel for the League of Free Moons, then. She frowned and typed away a comment until something came in over her headphones and she jumped. "We just got permission. Pixie, enter route 2599, planet bandwidth." Ivil tuned her out as she repeated some instructions from traffic control. Pixie just nodded, seeming to understand them all as she turned on some of the ship's maneuvering thrusters and gently pulled them away from their berth. The Held Together was sitting there, in the same place it had come in, looking like the old hunk of junk that it was. There was a good chance that she'd never see that ship again, and it made her feel strangely melancholic. "Pepper," she said. "Yes, ma'am?" Pepper asked. Ivil made sure her voice was pitched low, not to interrupt the others. "Make sure that Mint knows that the Held Together is a ship of interest. Maybe make sure its next few jobs are safe and lucrative." 26 would be upset if she learned that her home for so many years was lost to some freak accident. Or lost because the ship no longer had such a talented mechanic on board. "I can do that, ma'am," Pepper said. "I'll have a note added to my next report." Good, Ivil said. They slid out of the rather busy orbit of Driftwood Station, and Ivil noticed that while the SFO's movement away from the station didn't change much, they weren't the only ship leaving. The large tech made of Mars cruiser undocking itself at the moment was causing a bit of a stir, forcing flight plans to change because of its sheer bulk alone. "All right," Pixie said. "We're about a quarter way around from Callisto to Ganymede, which means we've got options. Either I cut in with a light, long burn, rely on the ship's ion thrust and get us to Ganymede tomorrow, ship time, or I give us a hard, speedy little burn with everything this baby's got. We see how hot we can run these engines and we do a hard flip and burn halfway to slow down." "The former sounds far more reasonable," Aurora said. "But the latter sounds more expedient. And speed is of the essence. We'll be catching a lot of attention if we move so drastically," Aurora warned. "Good. They'll see us coming, then," Ivil said. She smiled smugly as Aurora gave her a look, but it was a fair statement. If Mint were quick on their feet, then they'd warn the Emperor of their arrival. He, or at least his staff, would likely be watching them coming. At that point, being slow about it wasn't going to help anyone, least of all themselves. Besides, Ivil was in a hurry to put the other Emperor in his place, and it seemed like Pixie wanted to give the SFO a proper test. "Hit it, Pixie." "With pleasure," Pixie said. And then she proceeded to do very little, actually. "What?" she asked, almost as if she could sense Ivil's eyes on her. "I was expecting a sudden burst of speed, to be honest. We are still close to the station, you know? I have an impeccable pilot's record and this area is very busy. I'm not going to risk anything just to shave off a few seconds to our flight time. Let me get to a safe distance first." It took another 15 minutes of slow coasting, with only a slight bit of additional thrust from Pixie, before they were out of the immediate surroundings of the station. Once they were free, however, Pixie started to grin and her hands skimmed over the controls. "All right everyone, welcome aboard the SFO, I'll be your pilot tonight. Our goal? Callisto to Ganymede at a speed that will have the average bulk freighter quaking in their boots. Engineering, check-in." Yes?" 26 asked over the combs. "We're going to be pushing this baby hard. Is she all warmed up and finished with her stretches? Pixie asked. Oh. Yeah. Engines running at 100% pilot, our fuel's topped up, oil pressure is reading green, I gave her a proper checkup and everything is shiny and new back here. Ah, we haven't done a full calibration test on the engine running as hard as it could go, though. Will that be a problem? Pixie asked. Shouldn't be. I'll be nosing in on the stats while we move, I'll let you know if I think anything looks strange, 26 replied. Pixie's grin, impossibly, widened. You're the best, love, she said, which had 26 flustered right up. Okay, everyone, belts on, seats in the upright position dash and ironic statement from someone who needed 26 to tie blocks to the pedals to reach them, Ivil thought dash and we're off. Ivil allowed the sudden momentum shift of the ship to push her back into the captain's seat. She also distractedly grabbed Aurora's tablet out of the air as it shot by, heading in the general direction of Pepper's face at the kind of speed that would definitely result in at least a split lip. Aurora turned and probably tried to look contrite and upset, but her face was currently being squeezed in a rather unattractive way and that made it somewhat difficult to read her expression. Watch out, Ivil warned as she stood up and walked over to place the tablet in a small drawer next to Aurora. I'll leave this here for you, she said before returning to the captain's seat. Pixie kept them going, pushing into the territory of a hard burn, then a little bit beyond that. Ivil kept an eye on the readouts, noting that they'd crossed the 9 gravities mark a bit ago and were still climbing. Those were dangerous levels if sustained for a long period. Fortunately, Pixie let off on the throttle and the mood interim, as well as the pressure, lightened. Whoa! She cheered. 26, Ivil said as she opened the combs to the engineering bay. How are things back there? Good, 26 said. Her enthusiasm was somewhat contradicted by the several alarms going off in the background. Are you certain? Yeah. Why wouldn't I be? Nothing is on fire and the emergency systems kicked in when they were meant to. I am not an expert on spacecraft, but I don't recall those being meant to go off at all unless there was an emergency, Ivil said. Well, we wanted to test things, right? 26 asked. So I opened a few things back here, to give her some more gas. Probably not great for fuel efficiency, or, the life of our drives, but we got really fast there in no time at all. Ivil blinked, then decided not to push it. Let me know how much the repairs will cost once we reach Ganymede, she said. Nah, I can fix all of this with a few hours and some duct tape, no problem. Chapter 89, The Mushroom. Ganymede Station approached. Or rather, they approached it. The station was carved into the side and center of a small moon, and that had led Ivil to imagine a certain shape to the station. Stations and habitations stuck to the side of asteroids and lost dwarf planets weren't entirely unheard of nor uncommon. Stone was a decent radiation shield, it was tough and could serve as a good anchor, and it was heavy and stable. Some bracing and reinforcement, and an asteroid the size of an earthly continent could make for the perfect home for a decently large station. Ganymede was a little different. The station wore the moon it was part of like a mushroom wore its hat. The moon was carved in two, turning it into a rather fat hemispherical shield around the station that was built like a long stem. The stem was pointing towards Ganymede itself, and was larger at the top where it met the rocky top of the station. It narrowed down as it went until it ended in a narrow point. The station was quite pretty, Ivil decided as she spied upon it from afar. There were several smaller habitation domes on the rocky side, likely connected via tunnels through the surface to the main stem. The stem itself was rather large. At a glance, she estimated it to be about as large around as an Imperial Star Dreadnought, only with twice the length. The stem housed several dozen smaller docking facilities for ships the size of the Sifo and smaller, and the narrow tip had skeletal protrusions for larger cargo vessels. At the moment, 2 rather ancient-looking cruisers were stationed at the tip of the station, and 3 more were hovering nearby with a small complement of destroyers and frigates and corvettes. The Jovian fleet, in all of its underwhelming glory. 26, Ivil said as she tapped the combs on. Can you help me identify a few ships? 1 seconds, came the reply before 26 appeared on one of the monitors on the captain's seat. What sort of ship? She asked. 1 moment, I'll figure out how to tie you into the Sopho's cameras, Ivil said. Ah, never mind, I can do it. 26 replied. Ivil saw a number of warnings pop up and disappear on the console stuck to her seat. Then the ship's camera was turned on. It adjusted a little, locking onto the station, then the tiny forms next to it. The camera zoomed in, and what they saw looked like a grain of rice on a plate across the room. 26 said. That's a little far for an ID, she said. Ivil replied. How did you even see them? 26 asked. My eyesight is superior to the ship's sensors, Ivil replied. 1 moment. I'll carve out a facsimile of what I see. It wasn't too difficult to create some raw iron in the shape of the vessels she was seeing out in the distance. She made sure that she captured as many small details as she could as faithfully as she was seeing them. Some of her senses, of course, weren't limited to the visual, but they still gave her an impression of armored panels and locations with bumps and ridges that made up the surface of the vessels. 26 squeaked as a small armada appeared around her head. She flailed for a bit on camera, then calmed down and blinked up at the floating models. Oh, she said before carefully plucking the largest out of the air. Did you make these? Obviously, Ivil said with some slight amount of pride. They are almost as detailed as a model kit, 26 said. Almost. Ivil muttered. Anyway, yeah, let's see. These 4 cruisers are the same, I think I've seen them mentioned somewhere. They are Jovian pattern Hurricane light cruisers. Though I don't think the Jovians called them light, but that's what they are. Can you tell us more? The question came from Aurora, who was leaning back in the communications station. She had been reading something for a while now, not truly paying attention, but it seemed like her curiosity was piqued. Sure. So, they were built near the start of the Third Intersystem War. I think there were supposed to be like 50 built, but only 30 made it out of production before the war ended. One was lost in this big fight with some pirates a few years ago. The rest, I guess, are around still, 26 said. They were pretty advanced when they were built, but they're also some of the first warships built outside of Mars and Earth, at least capital-sized ships. Ivil nodded. There were several companies that built cargo vessels that were larger, of course, and those were located across the system. Organizations able to build larger warships, however, those were uncommon. It was one thing to slap together a destroyer-sized vessel like the Sapho. It was another to build an entire cruiser or an entire fleet of them. Are they noteworthy in any way? She asked. 26 considered it for a moment before shaking her head. They haven't had much testing? I mean, I kind of vaguely recall people making fun of them on some forums, and they're supposed to be very hard to maintain. Jupiter isn't known for having great engineers, but it does have plenty of resources moving through, and a lot of people moved here during the Third Intersystem War. That could mean that they had access to some good engineers, but it might also just not, Aurora said. A lot of resources were being used up during the conflict. Yeah, 26 said. They are relatively lightly armed, but heavily armored. Not very fast, I don't think. The rest of these ships. The destroyers are a mix. Some of these are old Earth Alliance ships, some of these corvettes are Martian-made commercial transports with some heavy modifications, it looks like. You know, Pixie said. You could just ask the local girl. That's a fair point, Ivil said with a grin. So, Pixie, what's the story here? The tiny pilot shrugged. It's a mix of whatever the local moons could grab for cheap. The League of Free Moons barely has any money, but they need a guard fleet to scare pirates off. It's not all bad, but it's nothing too special. Your shiny Martian navy would laugh at the sight of the entire Jovian fleet, but there are enough warships here to scare off even the biggest pirates. You'd need the entire series pirate fleets working together to really push hard into the Jovian system, and they all hate each other too much to ever try. So, ships mostly designed for anti-piracy? Ivil asked. Yeah. Those lighter weapons 26 mentioned? They track faster, Shoot more rounds. That's important when the thing you're fighting are mostly modified civilian-grade ships, Pixie said. So, the kinds of things that Ivil expected the average space pirate to field. It made some sense. The Jovian fleet is the largest one in the League of Free Moons, Aurora said. Most of the other moons have their own defensive fleets, but Jupiter has so many moons that it needed to invest in a larger overall fleet. And it was closer to the inner systems during the last war. Some of the fighting reached this part of space. All good to know, Ivil said. Seeing so many ships right next to such an important station isn't too surprising, then. Obviously now, Aurora said. That station is in geosynchronous orbit right above the seat of the League of Free Moons. The unofficial seat, that is. Unofficial? Ivil asked. The noblewoman sniffed. Do you think it is so easy to have so many small governments agree to a single location to call our seat of power? It's like herding zero-G adapted cats. The thing is, Ganymede spent a fortune building a large palace of sorts on the ground. Supposedly for the Emperor of Jupiter, but he never used it. And it's now the location of many of the organizations that make up the League. Lots of really pretty, really expensive architecture, Pixie said. I've flown over a few times. Did some escort work for some political sorts too. The city's nice, but it's also kind of empty. Really weird space. And it had a large station hovering above it, needle stem pointing down at all times, a station which held one of the 3 emperors. Ivil imagined that the people below wouldn't soon forget that. In a way, it might be a sign of security. Mars often wanted her to have a fixed location like that. But other than a few stations she enjoyed in some quieter palaces on the surface, she never cared for one grandiose place to park herself. Aurora jumped as the station's traffic control pinged their ship and started asking for information. Soon they'd be pulling in, and she'd have to be polite. She wasn't looking forward to it. Chapter 90, The Price of Love. The CFO was directed to the center of the station, towards a smaller docking bay near the space where the stem met the cap. Ivil was interested to note that the insides of the hollowed-out moon was filled with several large buildings, as well as an outer ring near the top of the stem. It looked to her like one of the ancient station rings for one of the earlier artificial gravity stations, reworked and retooled to decorate the inside of Ganymede Station. There were several ships in the dock they pulled into. A few corvettes, some large yachts, and a few smaller cargo vessels, sleek and rapid-looking. 26 oohed and awed as she did some ship-watching, but other than the notably elevated price tag, there wasn't too much of note in the ships they saw here. So, Aurora asked as she turned away from the communications console to properly face Ivil. Who are you going to bring with you for this one? Or are you heading out alone? Aren't we meeting with people from the League of Free Moons? Pixie asked. She was in the process of doing the final post-docking checks, but even though this was her first time with the CFO, she barely seemed bothered by the complex procedure. I'll be meeting with the Emperor directly, Ivil said. Which may require that I take on a certain stance, so to speak. It may be best if I do this on my own, to avoid any unpleasantness. She didn't mean issues with power interactions. Yes. The number of sensory cores being used in such a meeting would be throwing off enough radiation to make the air sparkle, and that amount of uncontrolled gamma radiation was likely enough to fry anyone and anything close, but she could spare the attention to keep someone she cared about safe. She, of course, would be minimizing her own snooping out of deference and politeness. One didn't walk into someone's home and open their fridge so casually. That would be rude. No, what she worried about was the potential for embarrassment. The Emperor of Jupiter wasn't always a subtle man. I'll be heading out alone, but I believe that you'll find some value in visiting whatever installation the League has here. I imagine that there will be a few notables residing at this station. People whom you might want to meet, Aurora. I imagine so, yes, Aurora said. She shivered. The idea of talking to an emperor. No, never mind. I'll do what I can to warn the League about the threat the Earth Alliance represents. I don't know if I can communicate to the whole of it without being indiscreet, but perhaps I can whisper in the right ears. Ivil nodded. Very sensible. Pixie, have we docked? We're locked in, Pixie confirmed. Are you really gonna visit the Emperor? I am, Ivil replied with a smile. Inch. Oh, a few minutes. See you all soon. Sonic, make sure Aurora is safe. Pepper, don't spy too hard, we wouldn't want an incident. As you wish, Sonic replied. Why yes ma'am, Pepper shot back with a quick salute. And so Ivil left. She relocated herself a few dozen meters closer to the station. Well within the scope of her shorter-ranged sensory cores, and in a space unoccupied by anyone. A few nearby dock workers jumped at her sudden appearance in the middle of a long maintenance corridor, but that wasn't her problem. She could tell where the Emperor of Jupiter was. His power was leaking out around him like light off of a star. It wasn't that bad, however. He was clearly making an effort not to bleed off too much energy, and most of it was contained within the moon he had made his home. Still, from so close, it was impossible to miss it. He was the sole reason that the Jovian system wasn't flying either the Martian or Earth Alliance flag. Taking over the area would be far too expensive with such a powerhouse guarding it. He was a wyvern nesting above a heap of shiny scraps. Not impossible to remove, but certainly not worth the trouble of chasing away. And she was a dragon coming to visit her lesser draconian cousin. Yes, she liked her analogy. Ivil kept a smile on as she made her way down the maintenance tunnel, then followed a few old signs out into a more pedestrian space. The station lacked gravity along the length of the stem, but she could tell that there was something like an artificial gravity field near its center. A comfort. She could understand. She'd been keeping up something similar around the SFO out of the same want. Sure, it was nice to float around on occasion, but it made it so much easier to look down into a cute girl's eyes when one was under the effects of gravity as opposed to merely floating about. Ivil made good time pushing towards the center of the station. She had no reason to linger about, and so she didn't. The few security checkpoints she saw were skipped past with a blink, and while she was aware that there was perhaps an alarm or two out and security was looking for her, she didn't expect them to ever make it close enough to matter. Eventually, she found that all roads lead to the center of the station, to a single large elevator guarded on every level. Not just by people in uniform, the unofficial uniform of the League of Free Moons, at that, but uniformed people with cores. The further from the center they were, the fewer cores they had. The level she was on, deep within the station, had a pair of C-rankers by the elevator door. The two alone didn't represent too much concentrated power, but with more of them on every floor, it added up to quite a bit. Enough for an upper B-ranker if they were to consolidate all of those cores. Or maybe not. As she tasted the air, she noticed that the two C-rankers had similar cores. Almost identical ones, in fact. Cores that were buds of one another, or perhaps that shared a common ancestor. It wasn't just one or two of their cores either, but most of them were shared. Clever, clever, Ivil muttered. Someone was producing cores en masse. Splitting them and regrowing them rapidly, only to split them once more. These guards had completed, healed cores, but the ones further out, now that she knew to look, had several incomplete cores within themselves. Splitting a core took some effort and would deny the splitter a usable core. The split core, once taken by someone, could take months or years to heal itself back to usability. But once healed, both halves could be split again. And again. In the Martian Navy, there were a number of common cores that had been split dozens of times. They usually presented with tiny, minor variations across splits, in potency and capability, but never so much that they were unusable. The Emperor was abusing that here, creating a guard force that had uniform tricks up their sleeves. It was also probably guaranteeing their loyalty. How very clever. And rather wasteful. Ivil walked up to the guards by the elevator. She wasn't impressed by the marble flooring or the golden banisters and carefully carded designs upon the closed doorway. Some of that might have showed, as the guards tensed up on her approach. "Ma'am," one of the guards said as she approached. "This is a restricted area." "Good, I wouldn't want to be bothered," she said. "Call the elevator up," I need to visit the Emperor." The guard frowned, then shared a quick glance with his companion. "Mint ought to have informed him of my arrival." "Let's not play silly games," she said. "Those never end the way you want them to, trust me." She could feel the guards tensing up for a fight, but before anything could come of it, a call came over their communication devices. Interestingly, it wasn't in a language she was familiar with, and from the sound of it, the call was filled with incomprehensible jargon. A way to mislead anyone listening in? She had to give them due respect, it was working, albeit only because she didn't want to put any effort into it. "I see," one of the guards finally replied. "Just one moment, ma'am, the elevator is coming for you." "How nice," she said. It didn't take all that long before the elevator doors slid open into a rather large lift, one with a single mirrored wall to one side and a seating area on the other. There were even a few Earth-native planks within. She stepped in, then crossed her arms as the elevator started to rise. As she approached the center of Ganymede Station, she could feel the curious brush of a powerful aura slipping past her. The Emperor knew she was coming, and he was allowing her into his sanctum. She sighed. Now she had no choice but to be polite. Oh, the prices she paid for love.